Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Tiffany has always been my constant, my North Star. We met in kindergarten, of all places. I can still picture her with those wild curls and that big, toothy grin, chasing me across the playground. She was fearless even then. I never imagined that same girl would become my world. We went through everything together: school dances, late-night study sessions, those awkward teenage years. When it came time to pick a university, there was no question we'd go together. She chose arts and history. Naturally, Tiffany has always been about storytelling and connecting the dots of the past. I went into science. It was the logical path for me, and honestly, I think it intrigued her how different our worlds were. She'd joke about how I'd end up wearing a lab coat while she'd wear a beret, scribbling poetry in a cafe somewhere. After university, we took our first real steps into adulthood. I landed a job at a pharmaceutical company, a big one. The kind of place that felt overwhelming and exciting at the same time. It was everything I'd worked for, but there were moments when I felt like a small cog in a massive machine. Tiffany, on the other hand, walked into her dream job at a magazine publication. I'd come home tired from meetings and data analysis, and she'd be buzzing with stories about her latest feature or some quirky artist she interviewed. Our lives have started to feel like two parallel tracks, running close but separate. We still have our late-night talks, where she curls up beside me with a cup of tea and asks me to explain some obscure science fact she read online. And I love hearing about her world, so full of creativity and color. She lights up when she talks about her work, her dreams, her plans for the future. At first, I was proud of Tiffany for how quickly she adapted to her new job. She worked hard, made a name for herself, and even found a group of friends who seemed to really click with her. But as time went on, I started noticing the shift in the way she talked and the people she surrounded herself with. Most of her new friends were these so-called liberal feminists, always ready to talk down about men as if we were some kind of plague on society. It wasn't just a few offhand comments either. They seemed to genuinely despise men. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt at first, thinking maybe I was misjudging them, but after a few interactions, my patience wore thin. These women would say things that were outright ridiculous, like how a wild bear would be a better companion than a man. I mean, come on. They'd laugh as if it was some kind of inside joke, but the venom behind their words wasn't hard to catch. I couldn't help myself when the conversations turned to their anti-men rhetoric. I'd ask pointed questions, ones they clearly weren't ready for, and watch as their smugness crumbled. I didn't enjoy humiliating them, but I also wasn't about to let them treat me like some kind of inferior species just because of my gender. Tiffany hated it when I spoke up, though. She'd give me that look, half frustrated, half embarrassed, and try to smooth things over. "They don't mean it like that," she'd say later, as if I wasn't fully aware of the tone and intent behind their words. But how could she not see the problem? These weren't just harmless jokes. They were tearing men down, and I was expected to sit there and take it. The more time she spent with them, the more I felt like I was losing her to their ideology. Our conversations changed. She started questioning things she'd never brought up before, as if she was trying to view me through their lens. It was maddening. I wasn't against women's rights or equality, far from it. But I wasn't about to stand by and let them poison Tiffany against me, against us. When Tiffany first brought up the idea of delaying the wedding, I felt my stomach drop. We'd been planning this for years. It was supposed to be the next big step in our lives together. Her tone was hesitant, and she kept saying things like, "I just need more time to think about what marriage really means." But I wasn't buying it. This wasn't her talking, it was them. The so-called feminist witches she surrounded herself with, filling her head with their anti-marriage nonsense. I couldn't hold back. I asked her straight up if this was their doing, if their warped ideas had gotten to her. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. That silence was louder than any answer she could have given me. I was furious. The woman I loved, the woman I planned to spend my life with, couldn't even give me a straight answer. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just walked out. I needed air, space, anything but sitting there and watching the distance between us grow. I didn't go home that night. I turned my phone off and stayed out, trying to wrap my head around what was happening to us. How could the woman who once talked about having a family and growing old together suddenly be questioning everything? By the time I turned my phone back on, there were dozens of missed calls and texts from her. She kept apologizing, saying she didn't want to lose me and that we could figure things out together. It wasn't easy, but hearing her say that she still wanted us made me relent. I went back the next morning. When I walked through the door, she looked like she hadn't slept. She hugged me, tight, like she was afraid I might disappear again. I didn't say much, just held her for a while. I wanted to believe her when she said she didn't want to lose me, but a part of me wondered how much of Tiffany was still Tiffany and how much had been replaced by the voices of her so-called friends. A few months had passed, and things between Tiffany and me were better on the surface, but there was still an undercurrent of tension. She'd gone back to spending more time with her feminist friends, parroting their ideas like one of their loyal flying monkeys. I kept trying to ignore it, hoping she'd eventually see through their nonsense and come back to being herself. But that hope was wearing thin. One day, she came home with a bright, almost nervous energy and dropped a bombshell. "Russell," she said, "how would you feel about going to India?" "India?" I repeated, caught completely off guard. "Why India?" She explained that she and her friends were planning a research trip to study the lives of women there, how they navigate their roles in society, how they're challenging norms, that sort of thing. The excitement in her voice was genuine, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the Tiffany I fell in love with, the curious, passionate woman who wanted to explore the world and make a difference. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another adventure cooked up by her friends, another way for them to fuel their agenda. "And you want me to come with you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Yes," she said, almost pleading. "I think it would be good for both of us. You'd get to experience something new, and maybe it would help us understand each other better." I wanted to say no. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck halfway across the world with her friends, listening to their lectures about the evils of men and the glory of wild bears, or whatever new nonsense they'd come up with. But the look in her eyes stopped me. She was asking, not demanding, not pushing, but asking. And deep down, I knew that if I said no, it might be another wedge between us. "All right," I said finally, my reluctance obvious. "I'll come with you." Her face lit up, and for a moment, it felt like the old days again. Maybe this trip would be good for us. Maybe it would remind her of who we were before her friends got in the way. Or maybe it would be the final straw. Either way, I figured it was better than sitting back and letting things crumble around us. The flight to India was long, and sitting there with Tiffany and her friends was less than comfortable. They were in their own little bubble, chattering about their research plans, laughing at inside jokes, and occasionally glancing my way as if I was some sort of alien tagging along. I tried to tune them out, focusing instead on the journey ahead. When we landed in Assam, I was struck by how breathtaking the place was. Rolling hills, dense forests, and a kind of quiet that felt like a world away from the chaos back home. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this trip wouldn't be so bad. Tiffany seemed happy, and her enthusiasm about the place was infectious. I wanted to believe this was just about the research and not something more. But later that evening, my doubts resurfaced. I was unpacking in the modest little guest house we were staying at when I heard voices outside. It was Tiffany and her friends. At first, it was just the usual chatter, but then their tone shifted, more hushed and serious. I crept closer to the window, just enough to hear them clearly. "Did you speak to him?" one of them asked. "Not yet," Tiffany replied. "I'll tell him tomorrow." "You need to," another chimed in. "That's the whole reason you brought him here. He can't escape from here." My heart sank. Escape from what? I stayed frozen in place, every instinct screaming at me to confront them, but I held back. If they saw me listening, I'd never get the full story. Instead, I stayed up most of the night, running every worst-case scenario through my mind. What was Tiffany planning? Why did she need to bring me all the way here to tell me something? And what did her friend mean by he can't escape from here? I was suspicious, worried, and more than a little scared. Whatever was coming, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. The next morning, the guard at the guest house approached us as we were getting ready to head out. His face was serious, almost grim, as he spoke in his heavily accented English. "A bear has been attacking people in the village nearby. Please stay cautious and avoid the forest trails. It's dangerous." Before I could react, Tiffany's friends broke into laughter. One of them joked, "Honestly, being with a bear sounds better than being with a man." The others chimed in with their own quips, giggling like schoolgirls at their cleverness. The guard, however, didn't find it funny. He straightened his shoulders, his expression unchanging as he looked directly at them. "I really hope you never have to meet a sloth bear," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "He will not kill you, but every second that he is with you, you will wish you were dead. Bear attack victims are scarred for life, physically, mentally. If he comes, you will wish there was a man to save you." The laughter died out quickly, their smug smiles replaced by a mix of awkwardness and unease. The guard's words lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. I couldn't help myself. I smiled and caught Tiffany's eye. There was a flicker of something in her expression, maybe irritation or embarrassment. It was hard to tell. Guess not every man is so useless after all, I said lightly, but there was an edge to my voice. Tiffany didn't respond, just looked away, clearly uncomfortable. As we headed out for the day, the mood among her friends was noticeably more subdued. For once, their sharp tongues had been silenced, and I couldn't deny the small satisfaction I felt. But the guard's warning stayed with me. Out here, far from home, the rules were different. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dangers weren't just outside in the forest. They were within the very group I'd come here with. That evening, as Tiffany sat down across from me with a serious look on her face, I could already feel my heart sinking. We need to talk. Those 4 words always seemed to carry the weight of something irreversible, and I knew this wasn't going to end well. She hesitated for a moment before diving in. Russell, she began, I've been thinking a lot about us, about our relationship, and I feel like I need to experience other people. I've only ever been with you, and I think it's important for me to date other men before we take the next step. I want to delay the wedding. I sat there, silent, letting her words settle like stones in my chest. So this was what it had come to. I didn't yell, didn't argue. Instead, I asked her, my voice calm, so you want to date other men? She nodded, avoiding my eyes. All right, I said, keeping my tone measured. So that means I can date other women too? That got her attention. Her head snapped up, and I could see the agitation bubbling beneath her composed exterior. Before she could say anything, I continued, if it's good for you, then it's good for me. Equality of genders, right? Her expression faltered. She clearly hadn't expected that response. Reluctantly, she nodded, but the tension in her jaw was unmistakable. I pressed further, keeping my tone even. And what happens if I find someone better? Someone I don't want to leave? What if I don't want to get back together with you? Now she wasn't just agitated. She was outright defensive. Her voice rose, tinged with anger. As a woman, I've been from the oppressed gender. This isn't the same. I can date other men because I need to grow and experience life. But you need to stay faithful to me. That's different. She was practically frothing, her words spilling out in a rush of frustration and contradiction. I, however, remained calm, which only seemed to irritate her more. Tiffany, I said, leaning back slightly, if you truly believe in equality of genders, then it works both ways. You can't have one set of rules for yourself and another for me. That's not equality. That's bullshit entitlement. Her face flushed, and she looked like she was about to argue. But for once, she had no response. I listened to her crying, but my decision was made. This trip had been a setup from the start, her carefully orchestrated way of breaking this to me in an isolated place, where she thought I wouldn't have any choice but to accept it. It was clear she'd already thought this through, likely even made a list of the suitable men she wanted to experience while I sat back and played the fool. Standing up, I said calmly, since it seems you brought me all the way here just for this conversation, I can only assume you've already done your homework and have a list of potential candidates for your experience. My role here seems done. I'm heading back. I began packing my bags while she pleaded, her voice cracking as tears rolled down her face. Please, Russell, don't do this. Just think about it. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just need time. I don't want to lose you. I zipped up my bag and turned to her, keeping my tone steady. If you need time and a list, then I need to get started on my own. Unlike you, I didn't come prepared. I need to head back home to begin my experience. Her friends came in, likely alerted by the commotion, and started trying to reason with me. One of them stepped forward, her voice dripping with faux concern, trying to spin this as some sort of growth opportunity for all of us. I looked at her, unimpressed. You know, I said, my tone cutting, you have a great body. Maybe under different circumstances, I'd even consider sleeping with you. But the truth is, you're so ugly on the inside that I can't even stomach looking at you for long. The room went silent. Her friend froze, and Tiffany's tears turned into a shocked gasp. None of them had a reply to that. I called the guest house guard and asked him to help me arrange transport to another hotel. He nodded without question, his no-nonsense demeanor a small comfort in this absurd situation. The next morning, I boarded a flight back to the USA. Tiffany kept calling, her messages alternating between apologies and angry tirades, but I ignored every single one. I had nothing more to say. As the plane took off, I looked out the window, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what we'd lost, and relief that I wasn't going to let myself be strung along any longer. If she wanted to explore her options, that was her choice. But I wasn't going to wait around for her to decide whether I was worth coming back to. A day after I returned to the U.S., I got a message from one of Tiffany's friends, one of the so-called witches. It was a photo of another member of their group, her face pale and bruised, with an arm wrapped in bandages. The caption read, "The bear got her." Apparently, the sloth bear that the guard had warned us about had attacked her while she was exploring one of the forest trails. I later learned she needed 97 stitches just to hold herself together. It was poetic, in a grim sort of way, a brutal reminder of how reality doesn't care for their lofty ideologies. The group stayed in India for another week, but I was long gone by then. Back home, I had already decided I wasn't going to give Tiffany a second chance. She had made her choices clear, and I wasn't going to wait around to be her backup plan. I packed up all of her belongings, neatly labeled them, and had everything sent to her father's house. When I called her father to explain the situation, he surprised me by agreeing wholeheartedly. "If she wants to screw around, that's her decision," he said bluntly, "but no decent man would stick around for that." I would have done the same thing. Then, with a bitterness that matched my own, he added, "Given her new ideology, she probably hates me, too. When she comes for her stuff, she can leave my house just as quickly. She's made her bed. Now she can lie in it." A week later, Tiffany showed up at my door, looking exhausted and defeated. I opened it just enough to see her face, and she immediately started talking, her voice shaky and desperate. "Russell, please, I'm sorry," she began. "I made a mistake. Let's just talk." I cut her off before she could finish. "Tiffany, you did not make a mistake. You made a choice. There is a difference. You want to go out and increase your body count. Be my guest. I'll tell all my friends that you are ready to experiment. In fact, let me do it right now." I opened my social media page and posted, "Tiffany is no longer with me and is looking to hook up with different men every day. Please book your slots." Her phone pinged, informing that she got the notification. "All your stuff is at your father's place. You have nothing here anymore. This chapter is closed." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she was about to argue. But before she could say another word, I stepped back and shut the door. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. Tiffany had made her choices, and I had made mine. Life would go on, and I'd find my way forward without the weight of her indecision dragging me down. A few months after the fallout with Tiffany, life had taken a brighter turn for Russell. He'd met someone new, a charming, down-to-earth woman who shared his interests and values. Their connection had been instant, and within weeks of dating, they decided to move in together. Life felt refreshing again, unburdened by the chaos and drama of his previous relationship. One evening, after a cozy movie night, Russell and his girlfriend were walking home, enjoying the cool air and the relaxed silence between them. As they rounded a corner, a commotion caught their attention. There she was, Tiffany. Her once put-together appearance was replaced by a disheveled, almost unrecognizable figure. She was wearing an outfit so revealing it left little to the imagination, stumbling drunkenly with two equally intoxicated women. The three of them were trying, and failing, to get off the ground, their actions clumsy and pathetic. Around them, a small crowd had gathered, phones out, live-streaming and laughing at the spectacle, some of them just touching them. Russell's girlfriend slowed her steps, concern flickering in her eyes. "Should we help them?" she asked softly, looking up at him. He stopped, glanced at the scene, and let out a small, humorless laugh. "Nah," he said with a shrug. "She wanted the streets, and now she belongs to the streets." His girlfriend gave him a searching look, but said nothing as they walked away. The image of Tiffany, lost and humiliated, lingered in Russell's mind for a moment, but only for a moment. He had moved on. She had made her choices, and this was the life she'd carved out for herself. Months later, Russell received an unexpected call from Tiffany's father. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and worry. "She overdosed," he said bluntly. "She's in the hospital." I just thought you should know. I'm not asking you to do anything. I know you've moved on. I didn't know who else to tell." Russell leaned back in his chair, the news sinking in slowly. A part of him wanted to feel something more. Regret, sympathy, maybe even anger. But all he could muster was a distant sense of pity. "Take care of her," he said simply, his tone devoid of emotion. After a pause, he added, "Not all friends are true friends. Maybe she'll figure that out one day." He ended the call and put his phone down, turning back to his girlfriend, who was reading on the couch. She glanced up at him, sensing something had shifted. "Everything okay?" she asked. Russell nodded, giving her a small smile. "Yeah, just a reminder of why I'm grateful for where I am now." With that, He left the past where it belonged, behind him, and focused on the life he was building with someone who truly valued him. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
My wife asked for separation, citing that I was a man-child. I admit, I would rather play video games than do chores. I was very forgetful about everything. I wasn't that involved with our kids. Her nagging made me more stressed out. She finally had enough and kicked me out. I just felt a sense of relief. No more nagging, no more stress. Nothing. When I got to my apartment, I cleaned everything. I stopped forgetting things. It made sense to wash dishes now, and it made sense to make my bed. I felt the urge to clean. It was like I was a different man. I was more involved with my kids, and it made sense now to pack lunch for them, to read them bedtime stories. Whereas in our marriage, I just felt burdened. I still played video, but it was not like the addiction I used to have. It's like my problems and all the mental blocks just ended overnight. I looked online for more advice on life after divorce and was told to go to the gym. I did it once. The gym is not for me. I do some jumping jacks and stuff for 15 minutes a day and eat healthy. I have lost 30 pounds in 4 months. I've been dipping my feet in dating too, and I have, or had, a kind of friends with benefits situationship. I'm taking things casual for now. All in all, my life is going on an upward trajectory. I've realized that I'm not a man-child, more so my wife is a bad partner, and that's why I used to seek comfort in video games and felt no motivation in life. When I separated from her, I became better almost instantly. My wife has seen my change and wants to get back together. I was wishy-washy in rejecting her at first, but I've made up my mind now and told her that she's better off without me, which is actually true. She wasn't wrong in leaving me, for her and me. She will not take that for a reason. She insists that she'll decide what's good for her and that I should return. I've been very nice while rejecting her offer. It's not like I'm being an idiot to her. She just wouldn't let it go. Why is she taking it all on her ego? She asked me why, and I told her she was truly better off without me. She found out about my friend with benefits, most likely because I posted a pic of us hiking together and contacted her to say that I'm a married man with kids and she shouldn't become a homewrecker. My friend with benefits told me that she doesn't want drama in her life and ended things with me, which sucks pretty bad. I don't know why my wife is being like that. I've been very nice but firm with her, and I'm not giving her any mixed signals. She just won't let it go. She's so determined to cause me trouble. Am I the idiot for not wanting to get back to my wife after separation? You are the idiot, dude. You aren't being honest with her. You're only telling her that she's better off without you. And even if you believe that's true, it isn't why you don't want to get back together with her. It is sending her mixed messages, because when she sees you making changes she's been asking you to make, she probably feels hopeful that you guys can move forward. She doesn't have the insight because you haven't communicated that with her. Tell her that you also feel like you are a better version of yourself when you're not in that marriage. Now is your chance to not be a man-child for real. Grow up. Tell her the truth. Jesus, I can see why she kicked him out. The fact that he thinks he's all grown up now is honestly just absurd. He's happier single because he cleans for himself, etc. While he lived there, it was all about him too. Now he doesn't want to be the bad guy by being honest. Man-child has no guts at all, and he doesn't want to leave his wife. He wants her to divorce him so he can play the victim. Yeah, it was all the wife's fault for nagging. Oh my God, she was nagging, when at the very beginning, he admitted he absolutely was a man-child. It wasn't until he actually had to clean up after himself, but to him, it just made sense. No, jerk, you lost your intimacy maid. No one's gonna do it unless you get up off your lazy butt, put the controller down, and actually do it yourself. The only thing he's done is prove that he could have been helping her that whole time and chose not to. And he's been blaming her for everything no matter what, because he never actually grew up. I realized my wife is a bad partner. Man, she wasn't a bad partner. She was your crutch. She carried the whole family on her back while you played video games. She is better off without you. I had 2 weekends a month of custody of my kids. Not that I didn't fight for equal custody, but I lost. I decided to give up custody of my kids because I was bleeding money. I was paying a lot of money on rent, and coupled with child support, it was not sustainable for me in the long run. I gave up the rest of the physical custody. It did increase my child support by 10%, but that was way below what I was paying for rent. I moved to my parents' basement to save some money. That's when the tide started turning in my favor. One of my coworkers, let's call him Richard, wanted a cheap place to rent, and I convinced my parents to let him rent their basement and let me stay in my childhood bedroom, aka a new gym room. It wasn't easy and a lot to ask, but I was able to show a somewhat concrete financial plan. For 2 years, Richard, now my best friend, rented my parents' basement, and I lived with my parents in my old room. My parents sacrificed to let me stay for 2 years. I saved a lot of money by not spending on anything other than food. I didn't buy any clothes, not even underwear, never went on a vacation, and never went anywhere that would require any kind of money. I was not able to qualify for a mortgage because of child support obligation, so I took my savings and my parents combined it with rent money from my coworker to put a down payment on a house. I've lived in that house for 6 years now. I rent it from my parents because they take normal rent from me and pay the mortgage, and the rest goes into a fund for me. I got a roommate too, so technically, I live for free. This has helped me to save a lot of money. My parents are still renting their basement, as they felt lonely after Richard and I left. Richard also bought a house in my neighborhood. All in all, life was difficult, but now it's good. I've saved a lot of money, and I'm planning a comfortable retirement. So after 6 years, I finally have discretionary money to spend. So I took a week off from work last year and traveled with my girlfriend, and I flaunted it on social media. My ex-wife suddenly started texting me that I was a deadbeat. I never missed a child support payment, and selfish, as I should have taken the kids on vacation. When I gave up the custody, I would have to beg her to let me talk to my kids. I remember the day when she asked for more money and refused to let me talk to my kids if I didn't give it to her. That was the last day I ever contacted her or my kids, so I didn't think she would even let me take the kids on vacation. I wrote about my journey to show that it wasn't easy to reach the place I am now, but I made it by sacrifice on my part and my parents' part. I have a house and money that I earned for myself. I should be able to flaunt it and enjoy it as I please. Am I the idiot? You are the idiot. You gave up custody. She won't let me talk to my kids is like the deadbeat dad motto. If you kept custody like a decent person, she legally could not keep you from them. But you gave up custody and blamed her for your predicament. Yeah, this doesn't even make sense. What was the point of fighting for custody if you were just going to throw away your time anyway? If you were given every other weekend, you had secured access to your kids. It makes no sense for you to have thrown that away. Have you saved any money towards your kids' future? Or is that based on your ex letting you see them? And while congratulations on rebuilding your life, are you suspiciously vague as to why you split with your ex? And it's Richard's money and your parents' generosity that rebuilt you, not your hard work. Not the idiot for going on holiday and posting it on social media, as that was the question. You are, however, a massive idiot for abandoning your kids. You had custody for 2 weekends per month, which you gave up. Why couldn't you continue seeing your kids while living with your parents? Your ex is right. You are a deadbeat father. Even though you pay your child support every month, you chose not to contact your kids for 6 years. The worst part, you're so darn proud of this. I really hope your ex is remarried and they call her husband dad. I, 30 female, lost my husband 4 years ago. We share 2 children. Our son is a tween and our daughter is a young grammar schooler. Since my husband's death, I've focused on myself and my children, and I have no interest in dating or finding another husband. My mom had experience with this when my sister and I were children, young grammar schoolers. We lost our dad, and our mom remarried 15 months later. At the time, she told us we were getting a new dad. Once her husband arrived, there was no expectation and pressure to call him Dad, and our mom took down all photos of Dad. We, my sister and I, took some photos of Dad and hid them with our friends out of fear Mom would destroy or throw them all away. She didn't, but the ones we didn't take were locked in storage and have never seen the light of day. My sister asked for them occasionally and was told she didn't need them. Our dad's stuff is likely in there too, if they weren't tossed into the garbage. It caused a lot of strain between us and our mom. For the last 2 years, my mom has been dropping hints that I should get back out there, and I always said that I didn't want to, or I would ignore it. Then a couple of months ago, she told me I needed to get my kids a dad before it was too late, that I needed a husband. I told her they have a dad who doesn't need replacing. She dropped it for another few weeks, but then she brought it up to me last week. She told me the kids need a dad, and I need a husband around, or I'll be alone and lonely for the rest of my life. She told me I couldn't remain dedicated to being my husband's wife for the rest of my life. She said I'm too young, and the kids are too young to never get another dad. I told her I don't want another husband, and my kids don't need another dad. She asked me where would I be if she had that mindset and I didn't have a dad. I told her I lost my dad at 6 and miss him every day, and I never had another one. Things escalated from there, and she asked me how I could say that when her husband had been my dad for 24 years. I told her he never has been and never will be, and just because she replaced my dad doesn't mean I want to replace my husband. Mom was furious and told me that wasn't fair and that I should understand her better. I told her I understood her even less after losing my husband because I would never remove all traces of him from the home, and I would never deny my kids his things the way she did. I would never force my kids to call someone else dad, and I told her I couldn't even imagine wanting to find them someone else to call dad. I told her they had an amazing dad, and he's still their dad, just the way mine will always be my dad. She called me spiteful and selfish, and she went to my sister for backup, but she told her she feels the same way. My aunt, who's my mom's sister, told me I shouldn't have said what I did, and accusing her of replacing my dad instead of just seeing that she wanted us happy is cruel, and I'm old enough that I should understand. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. Off the top, I'm sorry for your loss, and I hope your kids keep getting to know their dad through your and other loved ones' memories of him. There is some validity in your mom saying you shouldn't have to feel like you need to live as your husband's widow forever. You can treasure that love and also find new love. But your mom is majorly overstepping. Your kids don't need a father. They need role models in their lives, and you don't need to be married to that person for them to be a positive influence. It's clear your mom was scared to be alone, but her fear had a profound impact on you that wasn't positive, and she's old enough to understand that her choices have consequences. Honey, you mustn't repeat your mother's mistakes to validate her feelings. Your mom should have never tried to replace your dad. The way she handled your childhood was unhealthy for you and for her. It sounds like you're just now getting a chance to get these pent-up feelings out, and your mom's probably very defensive because she's either in denial about how much your actions mess with you or too upset to understand how much your actions mess with you. It's good that you were able to get it out there. My friend has been married for a year now to her firefighter husband. She's the only one in the friend group that is married. I usually host dinners every couple of months, and we'll do a late one for the holidays on Friday. I usually invite him, but money's gotten tight due to the holidays, and he eats so much. I understand why, but it always results in me doubling the recipes or running out of food. So this time I told everyone that I just wanted to do a girls' night. This means my friend's husband is not invited. If he isn't there, there's enough food for everyone without the double recipes. She called me up asking why I was doing a girls' night. I told her the truth that I couldn't afford to make double for dinner, and her husband ate a lot. She called me a jagoff, and now she's telling my friends why. Everyone is split, and no one offers to help with the food bill. So, am I the idiot? Is he insisting on more food? You also didn't need to tell her the real reason if you didn't want to, and you've probably made him feel crappy. To be honest, if money is tight, maybe don't host dinners or ask everyone to bring a dish. Then you have to pay for less, and they can double up their recipe. You are the idiot and should probably just have told the group it's getting expensive. You are happy to host, but bringing dishes and contributing to the cost would help instead of singling out one person and making them feel guilty for eating. Still, I understand that times are tough and money's tight for everyone, so it can be really difficult. So I do feel for you in that sense. I offered the group the option to Venmo me some money or change it to a potluck. They don't agree. He eats 2 to 3 servings. He eats more than everyone else. So if I don't double it, some of the girls will be hungry if he gets his fill, since he'll eat it all. Another option is he's still hungry, which seems to be a no, since that happened the first time, and everyone was upset. He sounds like an extremely rude dinner guest. I wouldn't invite him to my home either. When I go spend time with friends who are tight on funds, I make sure to bring my own food or expect to pay for pizza or something. I'd never expect them to fund my meals, particularly if I knew I was a big eater. You are not the idiot. And friend and husband should have chipped in with a big side dish of something and a bottle of wine. How do 2 people think that they're regularly going to dinner at someone's house and not contributing? Husband has no manners, but OP let it go on for too long. The husband shouldn't have been there to begin with. You did nothing wrong in arranging a smaller party to manage cost. Your friend just sounds entitled and ridiculous. Oh man, I had a weekend guest once. I made this nice pot roast for dinner and was going to serve the leftovers for lunch the next day. It seemed reasonable since it was the 3 of us and a baby, and he wasn't a bodybuilder or anything, large framed but an IT guy. He kept saying how good the meal was, and then he ate half of the pot roast in one sitting, you guys. I had to scramble to figure out lunch, and we're low-budget farm people who make everything from scratch. And I have to say, it was a factor in not going out of my way to invite him again. He's still a good friend, but not every friend is a good house guest. I am very, very frustrated. My son has been married to my daughter-in-law for 3 years now. I've always made extra dishes that didn't include meat to accommodate her. No matter how much it was a pain to do, I always made sure she had options to eat when I hosted, or she was over. She's a vegetarian and at one point tried to go vegan. My son and she never hosted due to living in a small apartment, but that changed as they just bought a home. They're having dinner this week, and I called her to remind her that I'm allergic to nuts. She then informed me that she didn't have time and told me to bring my own food. She told me that she cooks with a lot of different nuts and can't adjust her menu. This is where I might be the jerk. I told her I wouldn't be going, and neither would my husband. I've accommodated her for years, and I've never made her bring her food. This started an argument where she thought I was being unreasonable. My husband is on my side, but she and my son are very upset. Not the idiot. Allergies are not food critiques. You can die from a bad reaction. The fact you were accommodating her dietary request, and then she's completely dismissive of your actual needs, is absurd. Definitely don't go to dinner when the chef is blasé about trying to kill you. You accommodated her, even when her accommodations weren't necessary, and dependent on the nut allergy, you could just die being around them. The utter disregard for someone's safety is wild to me. Nuts aren't even used as the main ingredients in most foods, so not subbing out is wild to me. The idea that she can't change the menu because of a significant allergy is giving off the vibe that she did this intentionally.
Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate your support and hope you enjoy this story we've crafted for you. Without further delay, let's begin the story. Jonathan Carver wiped the sweat from his brow as he rummaged through the dusty attic of his suburban Chicago home. At 38, the high school history teacher still possessed the energy to tackle weekend projects like cleaning out this long-neglected space. "Hey, what's this?" he muttered to himself, pulling out a worn leather album from behind a stack of old magazines. Settling onto an old trunk, Jonathan flipped open the cover. A wave of nostalgia washed over him as he leafed through photos of his Irish-American family. His eyes lingered on a recent family portrait. Emma's grown so much, he mused, studying his 14-year-old daughter's features. Something nagged at the back of his mind. He turned to a picture of himself at the same age, comparing the two. The differences were subtle but undeniable. Emma's nose had a slight curve his lacked. Her eyes, while blue like his, had an almond shape he couldn't place in his family tree. Jonathan flipped to a photo of 12-year-old Liam. The boy's complexion was a shade darker than his own, his hair a richer brown. It's probably nothing, he told himself, trying to shake off the growing unease. But as he continued to study the photos, the seed of doubt took root. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Jonathan found himself hunched over his laptop in the dim light of his study. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard before he finally typed, "DNA test kits. What are you up to, hon?" Christina's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, a curious expression on her face. Jonathan quickly closed the laptop. "Oh, just looking up some stuff for class," he lied, feeling a pang of guilt. "Heading to bed soon." Christina nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Don't stay up too late. Good night, love." As she patted away, Jonathan reopened the laptop and placed an order for 3 DNA test kits. His heart raced as he hit confirm purchase, wondering what truths the results might reveal. Weeks passed, each day a torment as Jonathan waited for the DNA results. He found himself scrutinizing his children's features at the breakfast table, searching for any resemblance to himself or Christina. Finally, an email arrived. With trembling hands, Jonathan opened the attachment. His own results showed exactly what he expected, a mix of Irish and other European ancestry. But Emma and Liam's results made his blood run cold. Both showed a significant percentage of Mexican heritage. "This can't be right," he whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. That night, after tossing and turning for hours, Jonathan made a decision. He'd hire a private investigator to get to the bottom of this mystery. The next day, he met with a PI named Frank in a nondescript coffee shop. "So, what exactly are we looking for here?" Frank asked, his weathered face impassive. Jonathan leaned in, lowering his voice. "I need to know if my wife has been unfaithful.
And if so, with whom?"
Frank nodded, jotting down notes. "Any suspicions about who it might be?" Jonathan shook his head. "No idea. But the kids, they might not be mine." 2 weeks later, Frank called with news. "Mr. Carver, I think you should come to my office. There's something you need to see." Jonathan's heart sank as he looked at the photos spread across Frank's desk. There was Christina, his wife of 15 years, in the arms of another man. A man with features that bore a striking resemblance to Emma and Liam. "His name is Miguel Ramirez," Frank explained. "He's Christina's boss at the construction company. They've been seeing each other for at least 15 years, predating your marriage." Jonathan felt the room spin. 15 years? But we've only been married 4. Frank nodded. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carver. There's more." He pushed forward a stack of papers. Love letters, emails, hotel receipts. The affair has been ongoing and quite passionate. As Jonathan leafed through the evidence, his world crumbled around him. Every loving gesture, every family moment, all tainted by this monumental lie. "Who is he?" Jonathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Miguel Ramirez is a prominent figure in the local construction industry," Frank replied. "He's known for his philanthropic work and his Mexican heritage." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Jonathan stared at a photo of Miguel, seeing echoes of Emma and Liam in the man's features. "My whole life, it's been a lie," Jonathan murmured, more to himself than to Frank. Reeling from the revelation, Jonathan knew he needed support. He decided to confide in his family, hoping for comfort and guidance. On a Sunday afternoon, he gathered his parents and siblings in the familiar warmth of his childhood home. The smell of his mother's apple pie, once comforting, now turned his stomach. I have something to tell you all," Jonathan began, his voice shaking. He recounted the discovery of the photos, the DNA tests, and finally, the devastating results of the private investigation. As he spoke, he noticed an odd silence falling over the room. His mother wouldn't meet his eyes. His father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His sister, Sarah, exchanged a pointed look with their brother, Michael. "What is it?" Jonathan demanded, a new fear gripping his heart. "What aren't you telling me?" Sarah was the first to break. "Johnny, we knew." The words hit him like a physical blow. "You knew? What do you mean you knew?" His father cleared his throat. "Son, we found out about Christina's indiscretion a few years back. We thought it best not to tell you." "Best not to tell me?" Jonathan's voice rose, incredulity and anger battling for dominance. "You let me live a lie? You let me raise children that aren't mine, thinking they were?" His mother reached out a hand. "We thought we were protecting you, dear. You seemed so happy." Jonathan recoiled from her touch. "Happy? I was living in ignorance. How could you keep this from me?" Michael spoke up, his tone defensive. "We didn't want to hurt you, bro. We figured what you didn't know wouldn't hurt you." "Wouldn't hurt me?" Jonathan laughed bitterly. "Look at me now. Tell me this doesn't hurt." He stood, unable to bear the sight of his family any longer. The people he trusted most in the world had betrayed him just as deeply as Christina had. "Johnny, please," his mother pleaded. "We can talk about this. We can help you through it." But Jonathan was already heading for the door. "I don't need your help," he spat. "I don't need any of you." As he stormed out into the fading afternoon light, Jonathan felt more alone than he ever had in his life. His wife, his children, even his own family, everything he believed in had been built on lies. In that moment of crushing isolation, a cold resolve settled over him. He couldn't trust anyone he'd once held dear. The only person he could rely on now was himself. As he drove home, his mind racing with the enormity of the betrayals he'd uncovered, Jonathan made a decision. He would take matters into his own hands. He would have his revenge. The sun set on Jonathan Carver's old life, and with it, the last vestiges of the trusting, naive man he'd once been. In his place rose a man hardened by betrayal, determined to reclaim control of his fate. Jonathan Carver sat in his classroom, staring at the empty desks before him. The weight of his recent discoveries pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. He'd barely slept in weeks, his mind constantly churning over the betrayals he'd uncovered. A knock at the door jarred him from his thoughts. Principal Simmons stood in the doorway, his face grim. "Got a minute, John?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Jonathan nodded, gesturing to an empty student desk. Simmons sat, the plastic chair creaking under his weight. "There's no easy way to say this," Simmons began, "but the school board's pushing through a new history curriculum. It's not good." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, not good?" Simmons sighed, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "See for yourself." As Jonathan leafed through the documents, his frown deepened. The proposed changes were more than just not good. They were an outright whitewashing of historical events. "This is bullshit," Jonathan muttered, then looked up, remembering who he was talking to. "Sorry, But Simmons was nodding. "You're right. It is bullshit. But the board's under pressure from some big donors. They're pushing this through whether we like it or not." Jonathan felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. It was the same fury that had been simmering since he'd discovered the truth about his family. But this was something he could fight. "We can't let this happen," he said, his voice low and determined. Simmons raised an eyebrow. "We? John, I'm sympathetic, but my hands are tied." "The board." "Screw the board," Jonathan interrupted. "These kids deserve better. They deserve the truth." For a moment, Simmons looked like he might argue. Then his shoulders slumped. "You're right. But what can we do?" Jonathan stood, pacing the room. His mind, so recently clouded by personal turmoil, was suddenly crystal clear. "We organize. Teachers, parents, students. We make our voices heard." As he spoke, a plan began to form. It was more than just opposing the curriculum changes. It was a chance to channel all his pent-up anger and frustration into something productive, something that mattered. Over the next few weeks, Jonathan threw himself into the fight. He organized meetings, drafted petitions, and rallied support from every corner of the school community. One evening, as he was putting the finishing touches on a presentation for the next board meeting, Emma poked her head into his home office. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "can I talk to you?" Jonathan looked up, guilt washing over him. He'd been so focused on the curriculum battle, he'd barely spoken to his kids. "Of course, sweetheart. What's up?" Emma sat on the edge of his desk, her feet swinging nervously. "Is everything okay? You've been different lately." Jonathan's heart clenched. He wanted to tell her everything, about her real father, about the lies, about the hurt. But looking at her concerned face, he couldn't bring himself to shatter her world. "I'm sorry, Em," he said softly. "There's just a lot going on at school. But I promise, everything's going to be okay." Emma nodded, not entirely convinced. "Is that why Mom's been crying at night?" The question hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. He'd been so wrapped up in his own pain and his crusade at school, he hadn't even noticed Christina's distress. I didn't know she was crying," he admitted. Emma shrugged. "She tries to hide it. But I hear her sometimes." Jonathan pulled his daughter into a hug, his mind racing. He'd been neglecting his family, losing himself in this external battle. But wasn't that just another form of running away? "I'll talk to her," he promised Emma. "And I'm sorry I've been so distracted. How about we have a family game night tomorrow?" Emma's face lit up. "Really? Can we play Monopoly?" Jonathan laughed, the sound foreign to his own ears. "Sure, kiddo. Monopoly it is." As Emma bounced out of the room, Jonathan turned back to his computer. The fight against the curriculum changes was important, but so was his family, even if that family wasn't what he'd always believed it to be. He had to find a balance, and he had to make a decision about what to do with the truth he now carried. As weeks passed, Jonathan found himself living a double life. By day, he was the passionate teacher, rallying support against the curriculum changes. By night, he was a man consumed by thoughts of revenge. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, he sat in his study, surrounded by financial records and legal documents. The private investigator, Frank, had come through with more than just evidence of the affair. He'd uncovered financial irregularities at Miguel's construction company, potential tax fraud that could bring the whole operation crashing down. Jonathan's fingers hovered over his keyboard. With just a few clicks, he could send an anonymous tip to the IRS. It would be the first domino in a chain reaction that could destroy Miguel's life. But was that what he really wanted? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Christina stood in the doorway, her face a mask of concern. "John, can we talk?" He nodded, quickly minimizing the windows on his computer screen. Christina perched on the edge of his desk, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "I'm worried about you," she said softly. "You've been so distant lately. Is it because of me?" Jonathan felt a surge of bitter laughter rise in his throat. If only she knew. "No," he lied, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "It's just this thing with the school board. It's taking up a lot of my time." Christina nodded, but her eyes told him she didn't quite believe him. "I miss you," she whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. For a moment, Jonathan almost gave in, almost told her everything he knew, everything he felt. But then he remembered the photos Frank had shown him, the love letters. 15 years of lies. He pulled his hand away. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting her eyes. I need some time." Christina's face fell, but she nodded. As she left the room, Jonathan turned back to his computer. The next day, he met with a divorce attorney. The man was known for his aggressive tactics and high success rate. "So, Mr. Carver," the attorney said, leaning back in his plush leather chair, "what exactly are we dealing with here?" Jonathan laid out the whole sordid tale, the affair, the paternity of his children, his family's betrayal. The attorney's eyes gleamed with predatory interest. "Oh, this is good," he said, rubbing his hands together. "We're going to take her for everything she's got." But Jonathan shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I don't want to hurt the kids. I just want justice." The attorney nodded, But Jonathan could see the disappointment in his eyes. All right, we'll play it your way. But trust me, in cases like this, it's best to strike hard and fast. As Jonathan left the office, he felt a mix of relief and trepidation. The wheels were in motion now. There was no going back. Over the next few weeks, Jonathan methodically put his plan into action. He quietly liquidated joint assets, moving money into accounts only he could access. He gathered every scrap of evidence Frank had uncovered, building an ironclad case against Christina and Miguel. And then, one night when he was sure Christina was asleep, he made the call to the IRS. His voice shook as he detailed the tax fraud at Miguel's company, but he forced himself to see it through. As he hung up the phone, Jonathan felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him was exhilarated, finally taking action after weeks of helpless anger. But another part felt hollow, wondering if this path of revenge would really bring him the closure he sought. He pushed the doubts aside. He'd come too far to turn back now. The night of Miguel's company gala arrived, and Jonathan found himself standing in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. Christina appeared behind him, resplendent in a shimmering evening gown. "You look handsome," she said, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. Jonathan forced a smile. "Thanks. You look beautiful." For a moment, he almost wavered. The woman in the mirror was the same one he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But then he remembered the lies, the betrayal, and his resolve hardened once more. The gala was held in an opulent ballroom, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the crowd of Chicago's construction elite. Jonathan watched as Christina made her way through the room, laughing and chatting with ease. She was in her element here, the perfect corporate wife. And then he saw him, Miguel Ramirez, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo, holding court near the bar. Jonathan's fists clenched involuntarily at his sides. This was the man who had fathered his children, who had been sleeping with his wife for 15 years. As the evening wore on, Jonathan bided his time. He made small talk, nursed a single glass of whiskey, and waited for his moment. Finally, Miguel took to the podium. His voice boomed through the room, full of confidence and charm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'm thrilled to announce that this has been our most successful year yet. The future of Ramirez Construction has never looked brighter." The crowd burst into applause. Jonathan saw his chance. He stood, making his way towards the podium with purposeful strides. He could feel Christina's eyes on him, confusion and alarm evident on her face. "Excuse me," Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the applause. "I have something to add." Miguel's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Of course, John. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Carver, husband of our lovely HR director, Christina." Jonathan took the microphone, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. "Thank you, Miguel," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I just wanted to congratulate you on your success. It's truly remarkable what you've built here." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. Christina was frozen in place, her face pale. "But I think it's time we were all honest with each other," Jonathan continued, "about the true foundation of this company's success." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a folder. "I have here the results of DNA tests proving that Miguel Ramirez is the biological father of my children. I also have evidence of a 15-year affair between Mr. Ramirez and my wife, Christina." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Miguel's face had gone ashen, his knuckles white as he gripped the podium. "But that's not all," Jonathan pressed on, his voice rising above the din. "I also have documents detailing years of tax fraud and embezzlement at Ramirez Construction. Documents that are currently in the hands of the IRS and the FBI." The room exploded into chaos. Board members were on their feet, shouting questions. Investors pushed towards the exits. And in the center of it all stood Miguel and Christina, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. Jonathan watched as the company owner, his face purple with rage, stormed up to Miguel. "You're fired," he bellowed. "And you can bet your ass we'll be cooperating fully with any investigation." Christina stumbled towards Jonathan, tears streaming down her face. "John," she pleaded, "how could you do this?" Jonathan looked at her, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. "How could I?" he asked quietly. "How could you, Christina? 15 years of lies. Our entire marriage. It was all a sham." As security began to clear the room, Jonathan turned and walked away. Behind him, he could hear Christina's sobs and Miguel's attempts to placate the furious board members. But he didn't look back. Outside, the cool night air hit him like a slap to the face. He loosened his tie, taking deep breaths. It was done. His revenge was complete. But as he stood there, watching the chaos unfold through the ballroom's windows, Jonathan felt no joy, no sense of triumph, just a hollow emptiness where his anger had once burned. He hailed a cab, giving the driver his home address. As the city lights blurred past, Jonathan wondered what came next. He'd torn down the lie that was his life. Now, he had to figure out how to build something true from the rubble. The morning after the gala, Jonathan Carver woke to a world forever changed. The taste of victory was bitter in his mouth, mixed with the acrid flavor of spent anger and lingering betrayal. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the hollowness in his chest would ever be filled again. His phone buzzed incessantly. News of last night's confrontation had spread like wildfire through Chicago's business and social circles. He ignored the calls and messages, focusing instead on the next step in his meticulously planned revenge. At precisely 9 a.m., Jonathan walked into the offices of Hartley & Associates, the law firm housing Chicago's most ruthless divorce attorney. Bernard Hartley's reputation preceded him. A shark in a sea of minnows, known for leaving opposing parties with little more than the clothes on their backs. Hartley's office was a testament to his success, all mahogany and leather, with a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more per square foot than most people's entire homes. The lawyer himself was a study in contrasts. Expensive suit, cheap haircut, and the hungry eyes of a predator. "Mr. Carver," Hartley said, rising to shake Jonathan's hand. "I heard about last night's performance. Quite the show, I must say." Jonathan nodded, taking a seat. "I want this done quickly and cleanly, Mr. Hartley. I have all the evidence you'll need right here." He placed a thick folder on the desk. Hartley's eyes gleamed as he leafed through the documents. "Oh, this is good. Very good indeed. With this, we can't—" "No," Jonathan interrupted. "I don't want to destroy her completely. I just want what's fair. And I want the kids." Hartley's excitement dimmed slightly, but he nodded. "Of course, Mr. Carver. We'll proceed as you wish." Over the next few weeks, Jonathan's life became a whirlwind of legal meetings and court appearances. Christina, backed into a corner by the mountain of evidence against her, hardly put up a fight. Her once immaculate appearance had given way to dark circles under her eyes and a permanent look of defeat. In the end, the judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Jonathan was awarded full custody of Emma and Liam, along with the majority of their assets. Christina was left with a small alimony payment and visitation rights that felt more like a consolation prize than a victory. As Jonathan left the courthouse, he caught sight of Christina slumped on a bench, her head in her hands. For a moment, he felt a twinge of something. Pity? Regret? But then he remembered the years of lies, the betrayal that had hollowed out his life, and he walked on without a backward glance. Meanwhile, across town, Miguel Ramirez was facing his own personal hell. The IRS investigation, triggered by Jonathan's anonymous tip, had uncovered years of tax fraud and embezzlement. Miguel's once sterling reputation in the construction industry was in tatters. Desperate to recoup his losses and maintain his lavish lifestyle, Miguel turned to the only avenue he thought might save him: gambling. He started small, placing bets at legitimate casinos. But as his losses mounted and his desperation grew, he found himself drawn into the seedy underbelly of Chicago's illegal gambling scene. One night, in a smoke-filled back room of a rundown bar, Miguel sat at a poker table, sweat beading on his brow. He was down to his last chip, having already lost his savings, his home, and any chance of rebuilding his reputation in the industry. "All in," he rasped, pushing the lone chip forward. The dealer, a man with dead eyes and nicotine-stained fingers, dealt the final card. Miguel's hand shook as he turned over his cards. "House wins," the dealer intoned, his voice devoid of emotion. Miguel stumbled from the table, his world spinning. He'd lost everything. In a matter of months, he'd gone from being one of Chicago's most respected businessmen to a penniless gambler with a mountain of debt. As he stumbled out into the cold Chicago night, Miguel Ramirez realized that his carefully constructed life, built on lies and deceit, had crumbled to dust. And somewhere across the city, Jonathan Carver slept soundly for the first time in months, his revenge complete. The for sale sign stood stark against the manicured lawn of the Carver family home. Jonathan watched from the driveway as the realtor hammered it into place, each strike of the mallet another nail in the coffin of his old life. "Dad," Emma's voice pulled him from his reverie. "Are we really leaving?" Jonathan turned to his daughter, seeing the mix of uncertainty and hope in her eyes. At 14, Emma was old enough to understand the broad strokes of what had happened, if not all the sordid details. "Yeah, sweetheart, we are," he said, pulling her into a hug. "It's time for a fresh start." Liam bounded out of the house, his 12-year-old energy seemingly undiminished by the turmoil of the past months. "I call shotgun on the moving truck," he yelled, racing past them towards the driveway. Jonathan couldn't help but smile. Despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, the public spectacle of the divorce, his kids had shown a resilience that continually amazed him. They'd chosen to stay with him, recognizing his unwavering love and support even in the face of the shocking revelation about their biological father. The move to a new town was more than just a change of scenery. It was a chance to rebuild, to create a life unburdened by the weight of past deceptions. Jonathan had accepted a position as principal at Oak Ridge Academy, a prestigious private school known for its progressive approach to teaching history. As they pulled out of the driveway for the last time, Jonathan caught a glimpse of his neighbors peering out from behind their curtains. No doubt they were glad to see the back of the Carvers, tired of the whispers and scandal that had plagued the once quiet suburban street. The drive to their new home was filled with a mix of excited chatter from the kids and long stretches of contemplative silence. Jonathan's mind wandered to the curriculum debate that had consumed him in the midst of his personal turmoil. His victory in that fight had earned him widespread respect in educational circles, opening doors he never thought possible. As they crossed the state line, leaving the familiar skyline of Chicago behind, Jonathan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The anger that had fueled him for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism for the future. Their new home was smaller than the old one, but brighter somehow. Large windows let in streams of sunlight, illuminating rooms that seemed to hold the promise of new beginnings. As Emma and Liam raced through the house, claiming bedrooms and arguing over closet space, Jonathan stood in the empty living room, taking it all in. The first few weeks in their new town were a whirlwind of unpacking, school preparations, and community introductions. Jonathan threw himself into his new role at Oak Ridge Academy, determined to make a positive impact on his students' lives. It was during this time that Jonathan realized he needed to do more than just move on. He needed to heal. The betrayal he'd experienced had left deep scars, ones that wouldn't fade without conscious effort. On a whim, he decided to start a support group for people who had been betrayed by their spouses. The first meeting was held in a small room at the local community center, with just 3 attendees besides himself. "My name is John," he began, his voice slightly shaky, "and I'm here because my wife of 15 years had an affair with her boss. An affair that resulted in the 2 children I thought were mine." As he spoke, Jonathan felt a weight lifting from his chest. The simple act of sharing his story, of speaking his truth to others who understood, was cathartic in a way he hadn't anticipated. Week by week, the group grew. People from all walks of life, united by the common thread of betrayal, found solace and strength in each other's stories. Jonathan discovered a sense of purpose in helping others navigate the turbulent waters of broken trust and shattered relationships. It was at one of these meetings that Jonathan first met Alexandra. She sat quietly at the back of the room, her dark hair framing a face that spoke of both strength and vulnerability. When she finally spoke, her story of betrayal and resilience resonated deeply with Jonathan. After the meeting, they found themselves lingering, conversation flowing easily between them. Alexandra, it turned out, was also an educator, a history teacher at a nearby high school. I've heard great things about what you're doing at Oak Ridge, she said, a spark of admiration in her eyes. Your approach to teaching history, it's inspiring. Jonathan felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Thank you, he said, meaning it. It's been a challenge, but a rewarding one. As the weeks turned to months, Jonathan and Alexandra's friendship deepened. They challenged each other intellectually, sharing ideas about education and life. She inspired him to push boundaries, to think beyond conventional teaching methods. One evening, as they walked through a local park after a particularly intense discussion about the role of education in social justice, Jonathan realized something had changed. The hollow feeling in his chest, the one he'd carried for so long, had been filled with something new, something hopeful. He turned to Alexandra, seeing the same realization mirrored in her eyes. Slowly, cautiously, they leaned towards each other. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise of something genuine and honest. As they pulled apart, Jonathan felt a mix of excitement and fear. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, he admitted. Alexandra squeezed his hand. That's okay, she said softly. We've got time. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Carver looked to the future with genuine hope. 5 years passed in a blur of school events, family dinners, and quiet evenings with Alexandra. Jonathan's life had settled into a rhythm he never thought possible in the aftermath of his divorce. Emma, now 19, was thriving in her first year of college. Liam, 17, was captain of his high school debate team, his quick wit and passion for justice a constant source of pride for Jonathan. It was a crisp autumn morning when the call came. Jonathan was in his office at Oak Ridge Academy, reviewing applications for a new history teacher position when his phone buzzed. The number wasn't one he recognized, but something compelled him to answer. Hello? John? It's Rebecca, Christina's sister. Jonathan felt his stomach drop. He hadn't heard from anyone in Christina's family since the divorce. Rebecca? What's wrong? There was a pause, filled with the static of unsaid words. Then, it's Christina. She's gone, John. She passed away last night. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jonathan gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. What happened? It was her heart. Rebecca's voice cracked. An undiagnosed condition. She went in her sleep. As Rebecca continued to speak, filling in the details of funeral arrangements and legal matters, Jonathan found himself oddly detached. He felt no joy in Christina's death, but neither did he feel the crushing sorrow he might have expected. It was as if he was hearing about the passing of a distant acquaintance, not the woman he'd once vowed to love for a lifetime. But it was Rebecca's next words that truly shocked him. John, there's something else you should know, she said, her voice heavy with a mix of guilt and sadness. Christina, she's been struggling these past few years. After the divorce, after everything that happened with Miguel, she couldn't find work in her field. The scandal, you know? Jonathan listened in stunned silence as Rebecca painted a picture of Christina's final years. Unable to secure a job in human resources or any corporate setting, she'd been reduced to working as a janitor at a local community college. She'd been living in a small, run-down apartment, barely making ends meet. And Miguel? Jonathan found himself asking, though he wasn't sure why he cared. Rebecca's bitter laugh crackled through the phone. That bastard fled to Mexico about a year ago. Gambling debts, from what I heard. Left Christina to fend for herself. As the call ended, Jonathan sat in his office, the silence pressing in around him. The life he'd built over the past 5 years suddenly felt fragile, as if the ghosts of his past could reach out and shatter it at any moment. That evening, he gathered Emma and Liam in the living room. Alexandra sat nearby, a silent pillar of support. Kids, Jonathan began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. I have some news about your mother. He watched their faces carefully as he relayed the information, ready to offer comfort or explanations as needed. But his children, now young adults, received the news with a maturity that both surprised and saddened him. Do you think we should go to the funeral? Emma asked, her voice small. Jonathan looked at his daughter, seeing echoes of Christina in her features. I think that's something we need to decide together, he said gently. It's okay if you want to go. It's also okay if you don't. After a long discussion, filled with tears and moments of quiet reflection, they decided as a family to attend the funeral. Not out of obligation, Jonathan realized, but as an act of closure. A final chapter in a story that had shaped all their lives. The day of the funeral dawned gray and cool. Jonathan stood between Emma and Liam at the graveside, their hands clasped tightly in his. As the priest intoned the final prayers, Jonathan found his mind wandering, reflecting on the twisted path that had led him to this moment. His revenge had brought a kind of justice, yes, but standing here, watching his children say goodbye to a mother they barely knew, he realized it hadn't brought him happiness. That had come later, through his resilience, his focus on his children, and his dedication to his principles. As they turned to leave the cemetery, Jonathan squeezed his children's hands. He looked at them, really looked at them, and felt a surge of gratitude for the authentic life they now shared. A life free from lies and betrayal, built on a foundation of honesty and unconditional love. They walked towards the parking lot, where Alexandra waited by the car. Her presence was a reminder of the new chapter in their lives, one built on trust, integrity, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. As they drove away from the cemetery, leaving behind the last physical tie to their old life, Jonathan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was no longer afraid of the journey. He had his children, he had Alexandra, and he had a life built on truth. The ghosts of the past would always be there, lingering in the shadows of memory, but they no longer held power over him. Jonathan Carver had faced his demons, weathered the storm of betrayal, and emerged stronger on the other side. As the car turned onto the highway, heading home, Jonathan looked in the rearview mirror at Emma and Liam. They were engrossed in quiet conversation, their heads bent together. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that despite all the pain and heartache, he wouldn't change a thing. For it was through those trials that they had forged this new family, one bound not by blood or false promises, but by choice, by love, and by an unwavering commitment to honesty. The future stretched out before them, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with new memories, new triumphs, and new love. And for the first time in a very long time, Jonathan Carver was truly, deeply happy.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Since college, I believed life would follow a clear path: education, career, love, and eventually family. My early 20s were full of ambition and possibilities. I met Steve during grad school, and we built a life of shared dreams, a stable home, and successful careers. Everything seemed on track. Over time, though, I sensed a shift. The thrill of our achievements faded, replaced by a restless feeling. Beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect life, an unnamed longing stirred. An itch for something different, beyond my carefully planned world. The laughter from the other side of the room grated on me. It wasn't that I disliked my colleagues, I just felt out of place. Most of them were in their early 20s, brimming with energy. At 35, I didn't feel old, but their liveliness highlighted a growing gap between us. I hadn't wanted to attend the company dinner, especially since Steve was working late and couldn't join me. The executive we were celebrating was from another team, and I barely knew him. Truthfully, this unease had been building for a while. On paper, life was perfect. A good job, a nice home, a loving husband. But I couldn't shake the feeling of questioning where it was all heading. Steve had been hinting at starting a family, but I wasn't ready. Many of my friends already had kids, but the thought of diapers, daycare runs, and endless toy pickups felt suffocating. It seemed too settled, too final. I wasn't there yet. Despite telling myself I was still young, the group of young women dancing and gossiping across the room made me feel older than 35. They were welcoming enough when I joined the company, but it was clear they saw me as older, which felt disheartening. "That's quite the racket they're making," came a voice beside me. I turned to see Alex Wilson. Surprised, I quickly composed myself. "Isn't that group a goldmine for a single guy like you?" I joked. Alex, divorced for 2 years and known for his charm, smirked. "Tried that. way too giggly and immature for my taste. With a playful grin, he started impersonating some of them, making me laugh uncontrollably. His humor and insight surprised me, and our conversation flowed effortlessly. I hadn't realized how engaging he could be. Lost in conversation, I didn't notice we were among the last at the party. "Wow, it's late," I said, checking my watch. "I should get home before Steve worries." Alex helped me with my coat and walked me to my car. Before I got in, I teased, "So, what is your type?" Without missing a beat, he said, "That's easy. Someone like you." He winked, closed the car door, and walked away. I sat in stunned silence. Was he flirting with me? No way. I'm a married woman, I thought. But as I drove home, replaying the evening, I felt a spark of confidence. Even if he was just teasing, he chose to spend the night talking with me. Maybe I'm not so over the hill after all. When I got home, Steve had just arrived. As we prepared for bed, I was surprised to feel a sudden desire. Steve, though tired, responded. But as he kissed me, I felt a familiar pattern take over. After 12 years of marriage, I could predict his every move. Steve was thoughtful and put my needs first, which was comforting, but truthfully a bit monotonous. Lately, I'd been craving more excitement. I closed my eyes and, as usual, imagined someone else. Tom Hardy had been my go-to until he grew that odd beard. This time, Alex Wilson's face appeared in my mind, sending a rush through me. I savored every second. When it was over, Steve caught his breath and said, "Wow, you were something tonight." I hugged him and said, "All you, love," before slipping into the bathroom. Steve was asleep when I returned, but I couldn't rest. My mind replayed the night and my earlier conversation with Alex. His parting words at the car echoed in my head. Finally, I forced myself to push the thoughts away and drifted to sleep. Monday was hectic. Just before lunch, a knock on my cubicle made me look up, and there stood Alex. I blushed instantly, annoyed with myself, but he didn't seem to notice. "Hey, Kathy, want to take a break and grab lunch?" he asked. Despite my workload, I accepted. He helped me with my coat, and we left before I could reconsider. I wondered if the younger women noticed. Part of me hoped they had. At a nearby bistro, we found a quiet table. Alex's conversation was as engaging as at the party, and the hour flew by. On the drive back, he suddenly asked, "Do you know anything about interior design?" Surprised, I replied, "I think I have decent taste." "Great," he said. "I just moved into a new condo and could use some advice on colors and patterns. Would you take a look sometime?" "Sure," I said, flattered. We reached the office, and he kept the engine running as he opened my door. "I need to get to the airport for a flight, but I'll be back in a few days. I'll reach out then." He leaned over and gave me a quick kiss on the lips. Shocked, I stood on the curb as he smiled and said, "Back to work," before driving off. As I walked to the office door, I found myself touching my lips, feeling confused yet excited. Did that goodbye kiss mean anything, I wondered? It felt flattering and gave my ego a boost. The rest of my afternoon productivity plummeted. On Wednesday, Steve had to work late again. I knew he was busy with a major project, but eating dinner alone felt disheartening. Picking at my takeout, I reminded myself, Steve's working hard for our future so we can start a family. But the truth was, I wasn't ready for that yet. I wanted to enjoy life while I still could, and eating takeout in front of the TV didn't count. Thursday was quieter at work. I was startled by a knock on my cubicle. "Hey, Kathy, looking good," Alex said. I instinctively fixed my hair and straightened my blouse. "Stop acting like a single woman," I chided myself. "So you're back," I said, trying to stay casual. "Yeah," he replied with his charming grin. Before I could say more, he continued, "I'm heading to a meeting, but I wanted to ask, could you come by my condo after work tomorrow to check out the design? I'd love your input." Caught off guard, I stammered, "I guess I could stop by for a bit." "Perfect," he said, flashing another smile before walking off. I sat in disbelief. Is this smart? I thought. It's just design advice, not anything else, I reassured myself. But a part of me felt nervous. Why did my mind go there? I pushed the thoughts aside when my phone rang, focusing back on work. That evening at home, I intended to bring up my plans to Steve, not to ask for permission, but just to keep him in the loop. Before I had the chance, he spoke first. "Do we have plans for Friday night?" Steve asked. "No, not really," I replied. "I have to work late again. We need to wrap up the proposal for Monday's meeting." "Sorry, babe. I'll make it up to you," he said. A mix of emotions washed over me. Frustration at facing another night alone, quickly followed by excitement at the prospect of visiting Alex. If Steve isn't coming home, why shouldn't I go? Don't worry about it, I said reassuringly. Thanks, babe. I'm glad you understand. I promise to make it up to you, he repeated. I forced a smile, feeling a twinge of guilt over the small deception. On Friday morning, I spotted Alex heading to my cubicle, and a thought crossed my mind. He's going to cancel tonight. I'd even dressed up a bit to avoid looking frumpy. But before I could dwell on it, he appeared and asked, Hey, Kathy, are you still good for tonight? Relief hit me. Yes, I answered quickly. And Steve's working late, so I'm not in a rush. Alex's eyes widened briefly. Then he grinned and handed me a note. Here's my address. Come by whenever you can. He winked and walked away. I held the paper, pleased the evening was still on, but annoyed at mentioning Steve's plans. Why say that? I wondered, but reassured myself. You were just letting him know there's no hurry. The afternoon dragged. I checked the clock repeatedly and told myself, don't rush over right at 5 o'clock. Don't seem eager. By 5:15, I was refreshing my makeup. Soon after, I was in my car, tapping the steering wheel as traffic slowed me down. You're just curious about his condo's design, I told myself. Arriving at the address, I saw a modern 10-story building replacing old shops. Some landscaping remained unfinished, but it was already attractive. I double-checked the address. Alex's condo was on the top floor. The view must be incredible, I thought. He opened the door after my first knock, wearing dark slacks and a pastel peach shirt, unbuttoned just enough to reveal a hint of chest hair. He looked casually elegant, grinning widely. Glad you came. Do you like Pinot Grigio? He asked. I nodded, accepting a chilled glass. He guided me inside, and I took a sip to steady myself. The condo had a refined mix of grays, creams, and dark wood, accented with bright, abstract art. Wow, I said. Did you do this? I'm impressed. We moved through the space as he pointed out features, refilling my glass until, by the third, I felt light and giddy. In the kitchen, he took my empty glass and said, I think you'll love the bedroom. With a hand on my lower back, he led me down the hall. My body tingled as he opened the doors, revealing a large bed framed by floor-to-ceiling windows with a city view. This is amazing, I said, turning to him. He pulled me close, hands on my hips, and kissed me. You're so beautiful. I've wanted you for so long, he said, before kissing me again. I didn't resist. I felt swept away, thinking, he wants me? This gorgeous man can't resist me. The thought flooded me with exhilaration. I usually preferred a lot of foreplay, but there was no need this time. Afterward, I must have passed out because when I opened my eyes, Alex was next to me, catching his breath. I placed my hand on his chest and said, That was the best I've ever had. He caressed my face. I felt the same. You were amazing. Embarrassed by my reaction, I added, Sorry for all the noise. Hope your neighbors don't call the cops. He laughed. Don't worry. This is an end unit and the condo next door is empty. You're safe. I blushed and we shared tender kisses. Alex was fit, not overly muscular, but more passionate than I expected. Unlike Steve, who never went for more than once a night, Alex clearly had other ideas. We went at it again, this time with more intensity. When we finished, I playfully said, If I don't leave now, I'll never get home. He reluctantly let me go, but joined me in the shower, where it happened a third time. By the time I was ready to leave, it was 11:30, and panic set in. What will I tell Steve? Alex kissed me at the door. This isn't over, I want more. The words thrilled me as I left. Driving home felt surreal. I dreaded explaining my lateness to Steve, but my thoughts kept returning to the night. When I arrived, relief washed over me. Steve's car wasn't there. I undressed and slipped into bed. When he came in half an hour later, I pretended to be asleep. Sorry I'm so late, babe, he whispered. It's all right, I replied, smiling in the dark. Despite my exhaustion, guilt and memories battled in my mind. It was wrong but unforgettable. My last thought before sleep was Alex's promise. It's not over. Saturday felt routine, but my mind was in turmoil. Part of me felt deep shame. You cheated on Steve, it scolded. You should be ashamed, but another voice countered. So what? He's been neglecting you, wrapped up in work. You're a young woman with unmet needs. He's working hard for your future, for the family you said you wanted, the guilt argued. She wants that, the defiant side responded, but not now. She needs to live a little, break free from this suburban routine. This isn't a prison, the guilt rebuked. Many would envy your life, and many would jump at the chance to experience what she did last night, the defiant side shot back. The thrill, the passion, it was like something out of a romance novel. I had never felt so desired. Even my honeymoon wasn't this intense. To be wanted like that by someone as attractive as Alex was intoxicating. I want more, I thought, just once or twice more. It's not taking from Steve. It's a small indulgence after years of being a faithful wife. I didn't expect the excitement from my time with Alex to last this long. All week I kept replaying the moments, savoring the thrill of my secret. So when Alex invited me to lunch at his condo today, I knew what was coming and couldn't wait. If he hadn't made a move, I would have, I thought. By the time we stepped inside, we were desperate for each other, and it was incredible. Better than I'd hoped. Walking back to my cubicle, I felt euphoric, smiling at the 20-somethings who likely saw me as the dull married woman. If they only knew, I thought smugly. He chose me, not them. Later, I met Nancy at a coffee shop, desperate for someone to talk to. Nancy had been my college roommate, and after she moved to town with her husband Terry, we reconnected. She greeted me warmly, and once we sat down, I leaned in closer. I need to tell you something, but you can't tell anyone. Not even Terry, I said. Her expression shifted to curiosity mixed with concern. You can tell me. I'm having an affair, I admitted, my voice laced with an odd sense of pride. Her smile faded instantly. You mean, with another man? She asked. Yes, and it's been amazing, I said, brushing off her discomfort. I just had to share it with someone. What about Steve? Are you planning to leave him? Nancy pressed. No, I have no intention of leaving him. This is just about exploring my sensual side, I replied. Really? Like treating yourself to a spa day? I joked, attempting to lighten the mood, but Nancy didn't respond with a laugh. How do you act normal around Steve? She asked, her voice low. Steve's so absorbed in his work, he barely notices, I said. But that's not what I came to discuss. Let me tell you about Alex. No, Nancy interrupted, raising a hand. I don't want to know who it is. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing. It's not Terry, is it? Of course not, I snapped, feeling a sting of offense. I'd never do that to you. But you did it to Steve, she said quietly, her voice filled with disappointment. I took a sip of my latte, realizing the conversation was spiraling away from what I'd expected. Nancy reached out and squeezed my hand. Kathy, I love you like a sister, but this is risky. If Steve finds out, he'll never forgive you. You could lose everything. He won't find out, I said, though a hint of fear crept in. You promised not to tell anyone, remember? I won't, she said, but I wish you hadn't told me. Nancy and I finished our lattes, but our plans to go shopping were abandoned. I headed to my car, berating myself. Why did I tell Nancy? I thought she'd be supportive, but now she thinks I'm wrong. A darker thought crept in. What if she tells Terry? He'd definitely tell Steve. I was so distracted I nearly ran a stop sign. Shaken, I pulled over to calm myself. An accident is the last thing I need. Hoping for a distraction, I reached for my phone to check messages from Alex, eager to plan our next meetup. But my phone wasn't in my purse. Panic set in as I retraced my steps. Did I leave it at the coffee shop? No, I hadn't used it with Nancy. Last time was at home when I texted Alex. What if Steve finds it and reads the messages? I sped home praying Steve wasn't there. But as I entered, I nearly collided with him. Back so soon? He asked. I thought you were shopping with Nancy. I was, but I forgot where we were meeting. Realized I left my phone at home, I said, improvising. You mean this? He said, holding it out. My heart stopped, but he just smiled. Found it on your dresser. He kissed me, and I took the phone, walking back to my car. I slumped over the wheel, tension melting away. Too close. I need to be more careful. Having an affair was turning out to be hard work. I checked my phone. Still no message from Alex. Damn, it had been nearly 2 weeks since we last met, and 5 days without a word. I remembered getting a strange look from his secretary the last time I visited, so I avoided going back. Asking others would only fuel gossip. What if he's lost interest? I worried. I don't want to be ghosted. I debated calling him, but didn't want to seem desperate. He can be so arrogant, but I'm still so restless. Steve had mentioned over dinner that he'd be out of town this weekend until Tuesday, making my mood worse. And what frustrated me more was learning that the whole team, including Daryl and Linda, would be joining him. Steve introduced me to Daryl and Linda at an office party months ago. While Daryl left no impression, I immediately disliked Linda. She was attractive, younger, and hung on Steve's every word. When he praised her as intelligent and driven, I felt uneasy. Why is she going on this trip? I wondered. A dark thought crept in. Is Steve having an affair with her? Once planted, I couldn't shake it. It explained his late nights and frequent trips. He must be with her, I thought bitterly. Steve sensed something was off and held my hand. I know this is tough, but it'll pay off for us. When I'm back, we'll have time together, I promise. For a moment, I believed him. But later, doubts returned as we lay in bed. What if he's been with Linda all along? What if he plans to leave me? I felt humiliated at the thought. I considered calling Nancy, but realized I just told her about my affair. I can't accuse Steve now. What a mess, I whispered, tears falling as sleep eluded me. The next day, Alex finally called. We're meeting this weekend, he said, and excitement shot through me. With Steve leaving Friday until Tuesday, I planned to have Alex over for the weekend. Knowing Steve would be with Linda made my decision bold. Friday morning, as Steve left, I could barely contain my excitement. The plan was set. I'd follow Alex to his condo after work, then drive him to my house to avoid a suspicious car in the driveway. Just before leaving work, my phone rang. Nancy. Hey, Steve told Terry about the trip. Want to join us for dinner tonight? She asked. Thanks, Nancy, but I'm busy tonight, I said, guilt gnawing at me. How about tomorrow? She pressed. I'm busy then too, I replied, hesitating. Oh, she said, sounding hurt. After a pause, she added, Be careful, Kathy. I don't want you to get hurt. Don't worry, Nancy. I'll be fine, I said, trying to sound confident. After Nancy hung up, I cursed under my breath. The last thing I wanted was suspicion about my weekend plans. Worse, Nancy would need to explain my unavailability to Terry, Steve's good friend. Damn, I thought, imagining being with Alex in my marital bed. I'll have to wash all the sheets before Steve comes home. The weekend was a whirlwind of passion. By Sunday afternoon, after dropping Alex off, I was exhausted but content. I spent the rest of the day cleaning and preparing the house for Steve's return. He came back late Tuesday, too tired to unpack, and left early for work the next morning. We didn't talk until Wednesday night. Steve burst through the door, excited. We got the contract! The client loved our presentation. I'm getting a big bonus and might be up for a promotion. That's amazing, I said, going to hug him. But he stopped me, looking serious. I called your office today and talked to your boss, he said. My heart froze. I told him you've been working too hard, he continued, ignoring my reaction. He agreed and gave you Friday and Monday off, so we can go to Cancun for a long weekend. He smiled, proud of his surprise. Relief washed over me and I hugged him, holding back my emotions. Steve whispered, I know I've been distant, but I'll make it up to you. This weekend, we'll reconnect. He kissed me. Maybe we can even talk about starting a family. I hugged him tighter, speechless and not ready for that talk. Sitting at my desk after our Cancun trip, I felt heavy with guilt. What should have been a perfect weekend was a disaster for me. Steve planned everything as a romantic surprise, showing how devoted he was. The reality struck hard. Steve wasn't involved with Linda. He was simply working to build our future. He was a loving husband, and I had repaid him with betrayal. Every thoughtful gesture from Steve deepened my guilt. I acted cheerful, which he took as a sign for more romance, leading to nightly lovemaking. Despite his attentiveness, I faked my climax, something I'd never done before. Afterward, I lay awake, crying silently, ashamed of myself. The worst came the night before we left. After dancing and drinking more than usual, Steve was passionate, different from his norm. For a brief moment, I enjoyed it, until I almost moaned Alex's name at the peak of pleasure. I stopped myself just in time, but the fear liquidated any pleasure. Steve didn't seem to notice and thanked me for the passionate night, even apologizing for being rough. I reassured him, said I loved it, and held him until he fell asleep. Once he did, I silently cried. What have I become? I whispered. My phone buzzed under my pillow, set to vibrate so Steve wouldn't hear. The message from Alex read, Where are you? I need you. Along with it was a photo of him unclothed. I deleted them, but not before feeling a familiar thrill. A girl likes to know she's wanted, I thought bitterly. On Wednesday at work, Alex called and asked when we could meet. We planned for Friday night. I told Steve some office friends were going out, and he, still trying to make up for lost time, agreed. Damn, I muttered after hanging up. What a cheap person I've become. Thursday brought an unexpected surprise when I ran into Nancy at the grocery store. She approached me with a mix of caution and excitement in her eyes. Nancy, what's going on? I asked, curious. Her eyes lit up as she leaned in. There's something different about you, she teased, then paused before sharing her news. I'm pregnant. Terry and I are having a baby. That's amazing, I said, hugging her. We talked for a while, her joy contagious. But on my drive home, sadness crept in. Nancy's news stirred memories of wanting a family with Steve. Jealousy pricked at me. I want a baby too, I whispered, feeling tears well up. You can't start a family with Steve while sleeping with Alex, my conscience mocked. That thought sealed my decision. The fling with Alex had been exciting, but it was time to end it. Friday would be the last time. After that, I would focus on Steve and repairing our life together. The decision brought relief. The stress of sneaking around was too much. Now I had a way out. Friday morning, I prepared for my last meeting with Alex, determined to make it memorable. I packed a special outfit and, after work, changed in the ladies' room into a light trench coat, a fedora, and high black heels. When I rang Alex's doorbell, he opened it, eyes widening as I revealed the black bra, string underwear, and garter belt beneath the coat. His stunned look showed I'd made my mark. He pulled me in, our need intense and immediate. That night, I made sure Alex wouldn't forget me. Afterward, as we lay on the carpet, I met his gaze. Alex, you've been the best lover I've ever had. These past months have been incredible, I said. His expression shifted, a shadow of realization crossing his face. You're ending this, aren't you? Yes, I replied. I've decided to focus on my future with Steve. It's time to start a family. But we don't have to stop, he argued. You enjoyed tonight as much as I did. I did, I admitted, but I need to concentrate on my marriage without distractions. He exhaled slowly, resignation settling in. I guess I always knew this would end, just not now. Thank you for understanding, I said, getting up. And no joining me in the shower this time. He gave a small nod. Understood. When I returned home, Steve was waiting at the door. How was your girls' night? He asked, scanning my face for clues. The usual, I said with a casual shrug. Gossip, laughter, maybe a little too much wine. It was fun. He seemed satisfied with my response, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had taken significant risks, but it seemed like I'd gotten away with it. Sitting beside him, I reached for his hand. I'm going to be the most devoted wife ever, I silently vowed. Honey, remember when I mentioned Nancy's news? I asked. Steve nodded. I talked to Terry, he said. He's over the moon. I've been thinking, I said. Maybe it's time we try for a baby too. What do you think? Steve's response surprised me. He hesitated. I thought you wanted to wait a few more years. I did, but I've changed my mind. The time feels right now. Steve frowned, his brow creasing. It's a big decision and work is intense right now. I need some time to think. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone steady. But you said you wanted kids. I do, he said. Just give me a week or two to process it. I held back tears, knowing pushing him would only make things worse. Something else was going on, and I needed to find out what. As I lay in bed, frustration gnawed at me. My plan, ending things with Alex and starting fresh with Steve, was falling apart. What's making him hesitate? I wondered. Work is better after landing that contract, so what's the issue? Suddenly it hit me. My God, it's Linda, I whispered. He is having an affair with her. The realization hit me like ice. Steve's hesitation and distance had to be because of Linda. If true, it wasn't just physical, it involved emotions. Was this a real affair? The thought of him choosing her burned inside me. Images of Linda, her perfect hair, confident smile, and the way she hung on Steve's every word haunted me. How could I compete? She was younger, ambitious, and admired him deeply. Panic surged through me. I can't lose him, I thought, the idea making me sick. It became clear how much I needed Steve, a thoughtful and caring man. I couldn't let Linda win. A voice whispered, Steve is honest. He wouldn't leave you if you were pregnant. The idea struck hard. It was manipulative, but it was my only plan. If I was carrying his child, Steve wouldn't abandon me. I need to act fast, I resolved, deciding to stop taking birth control. The plan helped me sleep, though fitfully. The following days were tense. Steve was distant, and I was convinced it was Linda. Every time he seemed lost in thought, my chest tightened. Confronting him would only push him toward her, so I stuck to my plan, hoping to get pregnant quickly. Stick to the plan, I repeated to myself. I coaxed Steve into making love twice that week, careful to make it feel natural. He seemed reluctant, but I managed. I considered using what I'd learned with Alex to distract Steve, but dismissed it. Keep it familiar, I reminded myself. This is about our future, not seduction. The tension gnawed at me, imagining Steve with Linda. But I had to act as the loving, unaware wife, even as it drained me. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. This is Kathy. How can I help you? I said. It was Alex. "See me again. I miss you," he said. A part of me felt flattered, but I was irritated by the distraction. I whispered sharply, "Alex, it's over. We can't do this." "Come on, admit it. It was great," he teased. "Yes, it was," I said, shaking my head. "But I can't see you again. I'm off the pill. I want Steve's baby." "There's protection," he said, voice husky. "Just one more time. Don't you want that? Don't you?" I hesitated. My time with Alex had been beyond anything Steve and I shared, and the craving flared up. But thoughts of Steve with Linda twisted that desire into jealousy. Why should he get to have fun while I stay the loyal wife? I thought with a bitter smile. Against my better judgment, I said, "All right, Alex, one last time. Thursday at lunch." He laughed triumphantly. "You won't regret it." Regret hit immediately after, but desire had been sparked. Just one more time. Then it's over, I told myself. On Thursday, I rang Alex's doorbell, nerves coiling in my stomach with anticipation. He pulled me in and kissed me fiercely. Clothes scattered as we made it to the bedroom, shutting out the world. Lying beside him, I said, "I'm going to miss this, but it can't happen again, promise me." Reluctantly, he agreed. I showered, dressed, and returned to the office, feeling triumphant. If Steve was with Linda, at least I had my own secret. Driving home, I was delayed and surprised to find Steve's car in the driveway. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. Anxiety gripped me. "Steve?" I called. No answer. I checked every room until I found him in the den, sitting in an armchair under a dim lamp. His face was tear-streaked, his jaw clenched. "Steve, is everything okay?" I asked, forcing calm. "No, Kathy. Everything is not okay," he said, eyes filled with pain. I knelt beside him. "What's wrong, Steve? Is it your parents?" He pulled away, handing me a photo. It showed me standing at Alex's door. A chill ran through me. No, this can't be real. "Steve, what is this?" I said, trying to sound confused. "Maybe this one will help," he replied, handing me another photo of me leaving Alex's condo, Alex's hand on my wrist. "Steve, it's not what you think," I said too quickly. "And what do I think, Kathy?" he asked coldly. I scrambled for an explanation. "Those are pictures of me picking up work documents from Alex's place. You know Alex, right? He works with me. That's all it was." He handed me another photo. This one showed me in a trench coat, holding it open suggestively in front of Alex's door. My face was obscured by a hat, but hope flickered. It wasn't fully revealing. "I don't know who that is. Why are you showing me these?" I pressed. The final photo crushed my hope. It showed me entering Alex's building earlier that day, time-stamped. I closed my eyes, willing it to disappear, but it stayed. "Oh, right. I stopped by today for work," I said, trying to bluff my way through. He let the photo fall into his lap, shaking his head in frustration. "Stop lying to me, Kathy," he said in a flat tone. Then he brought out another picture, this one showing the building from a different angle. The camera had focused on a window on the top floor, and I flinched at the sight of the woman pressed against the glass. A man stood behind her. Embedded in the photo was a zoomed-in shot, clearly captured with a powerful telephoto lens. It was undeniable that the face against the glass was mine. He looked up at me, his eyes unreadable, and said harshly, "Don't tell me that isn't you or that you were just picking up more business papers." I collapsed in front of him, overwhelmed with terror. I was caught. He had undeniable proof of my affair. I was going to lose him. I was going to lose everything. I started sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Steve. I don't know what came over me. I never meant for it to happen." Panic surged through me. "It was only once, Steve. You have to believe me. It was just that one time." He shook his head, his voice now cold and distant. "One time. Only after a friend mentioned seeing you at that condo repeatedly did I hire a detective. He managed to get surveillance inside the building on the floor where Alex's condo is. I know for certain you were with Alex twice in the past 2 weeks, but the detective spoke to someone who confirmed this has been going on for months." Rage burst within me, and I shouted without thinking, "Nancy must have told you! I can't believe she would betray me like that!" Shock registered on Steve's face. Nancy knew and didn't warn me. God, Terry probably knows too, and I thought they were my friends." His eyes narrowed. "Actually, your girlfriend didn't tip me off, but it wouldn't have mattered. Once the detective started asking questions, plenty of people were willing to talk about your affair, including those girls at your office you go drinking with. Oh wait, I forgot. You didn't actually go out with them. You just used them as cover while Alex was with you." I sat there on the floor, my mind spinning. All I could think about was which of the young office gossips had exposed me. After a moment, I realized it didn't matter. What mattered was that Steve knew everything about my affair. When someone is faced with undeniable proof of their wrongdoing, the only option left is to beg for mercy. "Oh God, Steve, I am so sorry. I let myself get swept up, and once it started, I was too afraid he'd tell if I tried to stop. Please, Steve, you have to forgive me. Give me another chance. I want to have your children. I'd be such a good mother, such a devoted wife to you. Please, Steve. Please." He stared at me for a long moment, and I dared to hope he might forgive me. Then he said calmly, "Would it shock you to know that while you and Alex were playing around at his condo, I've been having an affair with Linda the entire time?" Something snapped inside me, and I began screaming. "I knew it. I knew that woman was after you. Oh, Steve, how could you? I'll never forgive you for this." "Stop," Steve shouted, his voice so loud it stunned me. "Listen to yourself, Kathy. You want me to forgive your affair, but you'd never forgive me if it were the other way around." He shook his head. "For the record, I'm not having an affair with Linda, and more importantly, I've never been unfaithful to you. But now I know exactly what you'd have done if I had." I started crying again, harder than before. Steve remained motionless, not reacting at all, just sitting in silence until my sobs faded. I looked up at him helplessly. "Is there any way you could forgive me, Steve? If you could find it in your heart, I swear I'd be the most loving, faithful wife. You'd never have to doubt my love again. I'd do anything to prove it, and I'd keep proving it for the rest of my life. I swear, Steve." He stared at me for what felt like forever before he finally sighed. "I believe you, Kathy. I believe you mean every word, but I also believed you meant every word in your wedding vows. And after breaking your promises so willingly and repeatedly, I could never trust that you wouldn't do it again." I had no response to that. I looked up at him in despair. It's not fair. Today was going to be the last time. I would never have seen him again if you hadn't found out. His face was bitter. "If that's meant to comfort me, Kathy, it isn't working." We sat in silence for what felt like ages. Finally, Steve looked at me again and asked quietly, "There's one thing I want to know, Kathy. Why did you do it? Was it something I did or didn't do in our marriage?" "No, it wasn't you," I said, unable to meet his eyes. "It was all me. I wasn't looking to cheat, but the chance came and I let it happen. Maybe I was afraid of getting older. Maybe I felt less attractive than I used to." I looked at him. "But those are just excuses. The truth is, I did it." And I started to cry again. I don't really know why. He looked at me with sadness for a moment before handing me a thick stack of papers. I had a good idea of what they were, but he confirmed it. "This is a copy of the divorce petition my lawyer filed with the court today. You need to get an attorney of your own to review the proposed settlement." I started flipping through the pages when a line caught my attention. "You're filing for divorce on the grounds of infidelity?" I asked. "Couldn't it just be irreconcilable differences?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm not going to let people think I was the one at fault. I did everything I could to be a good, loyal husband. If any of our friends are curious about why we're divorcing, I don't want anyone assuming it was because of me." Now that my fate was sealed, anger surged at how spiteful he was being. "I can't accept that," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "If you file on those grounds, I'll fight it. I'll bring Linda into this and countersue if I have to. I can make this long, messy, and costly." He sighed. "I told my lawyer you weren't like that, Kathy, that you wouldn't make a scene, but he said we should be prepared just in case. And I guess he was right. Maybe you'd like to see what the detective agency sent over today." He took out his phone and swiped his thumb across the screen. I gasped when I saw footage of Alex and me in bed together. "There's enough material to make me wealthy. If I start putting this online, you'll either agree to my divorce terms or these videos, and more like them, will be entered as evidence. Do you really want your parents and friends seeing this?" He looked at me coldly, stood up, and began walking away, but then turned back. "You should let Alex know that the soundproofing in his building is terrible." I was in the break room, pouring a cup of coffee, when one of the men from the office brushed past me. "Hey, Kathy, how's it going?" he asked with a sly grin. "I'm fine, Barry," I answered shortly, hoping to cut the conversation short. It didn't work. "I heard you're back on the market," he continued eagerly. "How about we grab some drinks after work? Maybe have some fun?" He reached out and lightly ran his fingers over my elbow. I stepped back, shocked. "You're married, Barry. You have a wife and kids." "What are you thinking?" I said sharply. He smirked. "From what I heard, that wouldn't bother you." "What do you think?" I said sharply. He smirked. "From what I heard, that wouldn't bother you." "That wouldn't bother you. You were married and you were with another man. Come on, it'd just be a little harmless fun. No one needs to know. I pushed past him and hurried back to my desk. From somewhere in the office, I thought I heard the sound of giggling, but I didn't dare look up. When I sat down, I slumped in my chair and put my face in my hands. Oh God, is this what I have to deal with now? Being fair game for every wannabe player at work? Even though our house had a sold sign out front, someone had left a flyer in the mailbox about a neighborhood party. I thought it might be a chance to say goodbye to some neighbors before moving. Honestly, I was lonely and tired of spending nights alone in front of the TV. A tent had been set up in an empty lot, and people were gathered around a portable grill where hot dogs were cooking. I filled a plastic cup with beer from a keg and walked through the crowd until I saw a neighbor who once lent us tools. I went over to chat. He was friendly and said he was sorry to hear about the divorce and wished me well. It felt good to hear something kind, but it didn't last long. A few moments later, his wife stormed over and angrily told me to stay away from her husband. I was stunned. I just came over to say goodbye, I protested. She pointed her finger at me accusingly. I've heard all about you and your morals, she said loudly. Everyone in the neighborhood knows. This is the only warning you'll get. Stay away from my husband. I noticed we had drawn a crowd. I dropped my beer, turned, and pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down my face. The humiliation was unbearable. They're acting like I'm some kind of infamous seductress, I whispered as I rushed home. Today, I resigned from my job. The constant whispers, sidelong glances, and giggles that erupted whenever I walked out of a room had become too toxic to endure. I never found out which coworker talked to the detective, and the uncertainty only made things worse. I felt like an outcast, a pariah. It was time to leave. Last night I called my parents and asked if I could come stay with them for a while. It was difficult to admit I needed to do that, but I had nowhere else to go. I hoped that maybe it would be easier to rebuild my life in a familiar place. There was just one last call to make, a number I hadn't dialed in ages. Hello? Nancy's voice came through the line. It's me, Kathy, I said hesitantly, my voice trembling. I'm leaving town and I just wanted to talk to you one last time before I go. Kathy, you almost cost me my marriage, she said sternly. When Terry found out I knew about your affair, he was furious. It took him a while to convince Steve that he didn't know either. I'm so sorry, Nancy. I never meant to cause you any trouble. I wasn't thinking straight back then. Anyway, I wish you a beautiful, healthy baby and hope the three of you are very happy together. I also hope that maybe one day you can forgive me. Tears welled up as I started to hang up, but Nancy stopped me. Wait, Kathy. I don't hate you. It's just that Terry was so angry about everything. He'd be furious if he knew I was talking to you now. I understand, I sniffled. I'll make this quick. Just one more thing. Have you seen Steve? How's he doing? I haven't talked to him since he left. Everything has gone through the attorneys. You don't know, do you? She replied. Steve's been transferred to his company's headquarters on the West Coast. No, I didn't know that, I said, my voice faltering. I'm glad he's doing well, I said sincerely. He deserves the best. Nancy's voice softened. I don't think he's doing that well. He only took the transfer because there were too many memories here. Terry spoke to him recently and said Steve is still miserable. He just buries himself in work and hasn't started dating or anything. Terry's worried about him. My sadness deepened. Do you have his number, Nancy? Maybe I could call him. No, she said sharply. If you called him, Terry would find out and know I gave it to you. I'm sorry, Kathy. I just can't. I understand, I said sadly. Take care, Nancy. Maybe send me a picture of the baby when it's born. I paused. I'm sorry for everything. I love you. I love you too, Kathy, she said, pausing before adding, but it's best if you don't call again. Then the line went silent. I'd packed what I needed in the car. The rest was in storage and would be shipped once I settled back in my old hometown. It was time to leave this city and this life behind. As I drove toward the highway, I couldn't help but smirk when my route took me past Alex's condo. I glanced over and was stunned to see his sports car parked out front. Curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled over to see if I could catch a glimpse of him. Since the confrontation with Steve, I hadn't seen or heard from Alex. At first, I avoided him because he was the reason for my downfall, but recently I'd grown so lonely that I tried to contact him, though without success. He seemed to be avoiding me, and while it hurt, I could understand. Maybe he thought Steve might come after him. Steve wasn't like that, but Alex wouldn't know. Then I saw Alex step out of the car and walk to the passenger side to open the door. A woman stepped out and she looked familiar. I squinted, then my eyes widened in shock. It was Linda. That conniving woman. I tried to calm myself. I'd ended things with Alex. He was free to be with anyone. I didn't have any issues with Linda. She'd never had an affair with Steve. But seeing them together set me on edge. I shook my head. It really was time to leave this place and all its painful memories. I pulled back onto the road and drove away, not sparing another glance at Alex and Linda. Linda handed Alex an envelope and gave him a businesslike nod. Here's the $10,000 for taking on the job, plus another $1,000 for successfully completing it, just as we agreed. Alex took the envelope and slipped it into his inside pocket, without glancing at it. "Pleasure doing business with you, Linda," he said, smirking. Then, with a curious tilt of his head, he added, "Why did you pick me to seduce her?" Linda looked at him as if the answer was obvious. "Are you kidding? After living next to you for a year, watching the endless stream of women you brought home and hearing their moans through the walls, I knew you were the perfect man for the job. The fact that you worked at the same company was just a bonus." Alex chuckled smugly. "I guess I do have my talents. But what made you so sure she'd fall for it so easily?" A sly smile played on Linda's lips. "Women can sense these things. When I met her at that office party, I noticed how she scanned the room, sizing up the men and comparing herself to the women. She was ready for an affair, whether she realized it or not. I knew she'd take the bait, even for someone like you." He stiffened slightly at the dig, but chose to stay quiet, knowing she was right. After a moment of silence, Alex asked, "So, when did you decide to go after him?" Linda's eyes took on a distant, reflective look. 18 months ago. I fell in love with him the moment I joined his team and started planning from that day." Alex's eyes widened. "You've been plotting this for 18 months?" Linda smiled. "These things take time, Alex. First, I had to earn his professional respect, then become his friend, and finally his confidant." "But why go to all this trouble involving me and his wife?" Alex asked. "Why not just seduce him yourself and take him from her? You're attractive enough to pull it off." Linda ignored the flattery. "He would never leave his wife, no matter how he felt about me. His loyalty to her was one of the reasons I knew he was the one for me." Alex's brow furrowed. "So why didn't you act sooner, right after she first came to me? Why not reveal it then?" "You don't get it," she said. "I had to follow the plan. I couldn't risk him forgiving her for a one-time mistake. It needed to be a full-blown affair, something he could never move past." Alex nodded slowly. "Now I have a question for you," she said. "Would you have approached her if I hadn't brought you the offer?" He shook his head. "No. I prefer younger women. There are plenty at the office who—" He cut himself off abruptly. "But I do like women your age, Linda. Is there any chance—" "Don't even think about it," she said coldly. Just then, a taxi pulled up to the parking area. Linda pointed to her luggage, and the driver began loading it into the trunk. "So, you're headed to the West Coast?" Alex asked, a bit wistfully. "That's right," she nodded. "My transfer was just approved. I start at headquarters next week." Alex studied her carefully. "How can you be so sure you'll get him? With his wife out of the picture, I have an open path. The timing couldn't be better. He's had time for the pain of her betrayal to ease. He's lonely and hates the idea of starting over. He's ready." "You seem confident," Alex said. "Don't you have any doubts?" She got into the cab and rolled down the window. "Not at all," she said with a confident smile. "Steve is picking me up at the airport." Alex shook his head in disbelief. "You're something else. Like a real Machiavelli." "No," she replied. "Just focused and highly motivated." She waved as the taxi headed toward the airport. 2 weeks later, Steve sat at the bar finishing his drink when he heard a voice behind him. "I hope I'm not late," the man said. Steve turned and gave a nod. "Good to see you, Mr. Steele." "Call me Matt," the man replied, sliding into the seat next to him. "You were right about your friend Linda. She was involved with Alex, paid him in cash. Here are the photos. There's Alex, and that's Linda handing over the money." Steve glanced at the images, a knowing expression crossing his face. "Looks like Linda has her sights set on me." "It's irrelevant," Steve said calmly. "I just needed to know who to keep at arm's length. Plans like theirs only work if you allow them to. If someone decides to betray you, it's their choice." Matt nodded. "True enough. Oh, and by the way, Alex was shot last night. He's in the ICU on a ventilator, and it doesn't look good. Once they turn it off, he's gone. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Steve?" Steve met Matt's gaze with a level expression. "You're the detective, Matt. Do Do you think I had anything to do with it? Matt chuckled. Nah, just messing with you. Turns out it was a guy named Jared Garcia. Alex was sleeping with his wife. Now both Jared and his wife are missing, and Alex is barely holding on. Looks like this story might just come to a fitting end. They both chuckled. 2 months later, as Steve packed up his office, placing his belongings into a box, he sensed someone's presence behind him. You're leaving? A familiar voice said. Steve turned to see Linda standing in the doorway. Hello, Linda. Yes, it's time for a change. New career, new city, new life. Linda stepped closer and whispered, There's something I need to tell you, Steve. His eyes narrowed, and his voice cut through the air. Is it that you orchestrated Alex seducing my wife so you could take her place? The blood drained from Linda's face, and she stuttered, No, that's not true. I don't even know who Alex is. Steve's mouth twisted into a cold smile. Linda, if you love someone, you don't scheme against those they care about. When you do, you become their enemy. So one more step, and you'll face consequences you can't imagine. Leave now before I forget my manners. Tears filled Linda's eyes as she quickly turned and fled from his office. 2 weeks later, Steve was at the gym, pushing himself hard to regain the strength he had lost during the turmoil of the past months. He pressed the stop button on the treadmill and stepped off, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. He sat on a bench to catch his breath. Looks like you had quite a workout today, said a cheerful voice from his left. He turned to see a striking woman, also sweaty, giving him a bright smile. Thanks. Looks like you did better than me, he said with a slight grin. She laughed. See you later. I need to hit the showers. A few minutes later, Steve made his way to his locker and pulled out his phone. A notification for a new message appeared, and he opened it to find a simple smiley emoji. He chuckled, feeling a rare moment of lightness. Thousands of miles away, an ambulance rushed to the hospital. Inside, the medic worked frantically to stabilize the patient. She's losing blood fast. Step on it, he yelled to the driver. 15 minutes later, an ER doctor checked for a pulse, then lowered his head and said, It's too late. She's gone. A police officer approached the truck driver, who stood by, still in shock. How fast was she going? I was doing about 30. She had to be going at least 100, the driver stammered, eyes wide. I hit the brakes, but she didn't even slow down before crashing into the back of my truck. All right, the cop said. We may need to contact you for more questions if necessary. Officer Pat turned to his partner. Let's wait for the autopsy report. See if she was intoxicated. With that car wrecked so badly, I doubt the forensics team will find much. We might end up just calling it reckless driving. Officer Jones nodded. Sounds about right. Later that day, Steve's phone rang. He checked the caller ID and answered, Hello, Matt. It's like you expected my call, Matt said. Steve smiled. No, it's just a beautiful day here in Thailand. Matt's tone shifted. Steve, Alex died a few days ago, and Linda died this morning. This time I'm not kidding. How'd you think I did it, Matt? You're the detective, Matt. Figure it out. Like you said, this story has a happy ending. Have a great day. Steve added, and good luck finding out how I did it before hanging up. Matt stayed silent for a moment before murmuring to himself, I will, Steve. I will. 2 months earlier, Jared Garcia sat in his office when an envelope arrived. Inside were photos of his wife and Alex. Jared, an ex-Marine discharged for PTSD after a solo mission gone wrong in Afghanistan, had a reputation for volatility. The betrayal pushed him over the edge. Alex was strong, but no match for a trained Marine. 3 bullets sealed his fate. Jared's wife disappeared, and the sender of the envelope remained unknown. 5 months later, Matt pieced things together over drinks with a cop friend. The realization hit him. He had taken the pictures and given them to Steve. The investigation revealed Linda's end of life was due to a car accident, with unprescribed sedatives found in her system. The police concluded she was a regular user and closed the case. However, Matt discovered the sedatives had the same manufacturing date, just a week before her end of life. He knew Linda wasn't independent. Someone had slipped the pills into her meal. Her last meal was chicken soup and dumplings from the Blazing Dragon. The waiter who served her had started a month before and quit on the day of her accident. Chen Lu had returned to his hometown in China after amassing a sum too large for just 5 months of work. 7 months later, Steve was savoring the fresh air when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and smirked. Hello, Matt. How's life treating you? He answered. I'm good, Steve. And you? Matt's voice was steady. "Enjoying some soup," Steve replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I wanted to let you know. I figured it out," Matt said, a note of finality in his voice. "I knew you would, Matt, but I assume you realize there's nothing solid enough to tie me to it in court," Steve said calmly. "Yes, Steve, it could be linked to you, but it wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. I just wanted to say it's been good working with you. Thanks for everything, Steve." Steve's smile deepened. "Thank you, Matt." Steve hung up and ordered another bowl of soup at a new restaurant on a quiet street in Inku, China. Cindy met and fell in love with Rick Thomas during her freshman year of college. He was funny, energetic, and always knew how to make her laugh and feel special. They enjoyed long Sunday walks and sneaking into empty campus buildings to talk for hours. Rick was both handsome and kind, qualities Cindy's parents and his family appreciated. His sister Kathy once joked, "If he ever breaks up with you, we'll definitely miss him." By his last semester, Rick secured a job with a big investment firm on the West Coast, while Cindy earned her teaching degree and found a job in Orange County. To celebrate, Rick took her to dinner in San Clemente and proposed with a beautiful ring that belonged to his grandmother. Cindy tearfully accepted, and the surrounding diners applauded. 9 years later, Cindy, now 32, had twins, Michael and Sarah, and was teaching 7th grade math. Tired of the low pay and long hours, she decided to leave her job. She managed to find a new career path within 5 months, thanks to her college best friend, Kelly. Kelly was a free spirit, always dragging Cindy into adventures. One day, Kelly invited Cindy to be her date for her boss's wedding in Napa. After discussing it with Rick, who encouraged her to go, Cindy agreed. At the wedding, Cindy watched Kelly dance with a much younger groomsman and chatted with a bride's cousin, Sally, who remarked on the need for a good event coordinator. This comment sparked an idea in Cindy. Within 6 months, she started her event management company, We Plan You Play, utilizing her organizational skills. 2 years later, Cindy's business thrived, especially with destination weddings on the California coast. That's when Cindy met Bennett Davis, who owned 3 upscale boutique hotels perfect for destination weddings in San Diego, Santa Barbara, and the Monterey Peninsula. At 26, Bennett bought a rundown mansion in Santa Barbara, working tirelessly to open it on time and under budget. Despite initial slow growth, he reached profitability by the 4th year. He then expanded, opening hotels in San Diego and Monterey over the next 5 years. 14 years later, Bennett was still dedicated to his business, but also enjoyed fine wines, dancing, and socializing, known as a CBNA. A confirmed bachelor, but not in prick. He treated people fairly and was clear about not seeking long-term relationships. At 40, he was content with his life. About 16 months before a significant event, Bennett and his manager, Lori Templeton, attended a hospitality industry convention in Los Angeles. There, they encountered Cindy Thomas at her We Plan You Play exhibit. Bennett was impressed by Cindy's presentation and intrigued by her bright blue eyes. They had a 45-minute conversation where Bennett asked both professional and personal questions, gauging her experience and personality. Cindy, wearing a wedding ring, answered enthusiastically, appreciating Bennett's mix of professionalism and lightheartedness. Lori observed Bennett's genuine interest in Cindy. At the end of their talk, Bennett invited Cindy to dinner, but she declined, mentioning her family. Instead, they planned for Cindy to visit his Santa Barbara hotel for lunch and a tour the following week. Cindy's visit went exceptionally well. She arrived early and visited the nearby Old Mission before meeting Bennett and Lori. The valet warmly welcomed her, and she was pleased with the hospitality. As she approached the hotel lobby, she saw Bennett, dressed sharply in khakis and a dark blue shirt, which highlighted his strong features and dark eyes. Cindy rarely noticed other men besides Rick, whom she considered gorgeous. However, Bennett Davis, who owned 3 boutique hotels in San Diego, Santa Barbara, and the Monterey Peninsula, caught her attention with his good looks and charisma. When they met for a tour of his Santa Barbara hotel, Bennett welcomed Cindy warmly. They shared a mutual respect for hard work and success, and instantly connected. Cindy wore a stylish but modest black sundress and sandals, aware that appearances mattered in business. During the tour, Bennett impressed Cindy with his attention to detail. They enjoyed a lunch with California wildflowers and her favorite Pinot Noir. Bennett's charm was evident, but Cindy remained professional, limiting her wine intake to focus on business. After lunch, they toured the hotel, and Cindy impressed Bennett with her knowledge of the property's history. They laughed and discussed potential partnerships for hosting weddings and family reunions. When it was time to leave, Bennett warmly shook Cindy's hand, holding it a bit longer than usual, and kissed her cheek. Cindy felt a surprising connection to Bennett, but reminded herself of her commitment to Rick and their children. Driving home, she found a book her daughter had left in the car, bringing her back to reality. Cindy chastised herself for entertaining thoughts about Bennett and resolved to stay focused on her family and career. Back at the hotel, Bennett settled some business matters before retiring to his room to rest before his evening beach run. Lying on his bed, he thought about the day and especially about Cindy. Unlike other beautiful women he had dated, Cindy stood out for her inner and outer beauty. She was married, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. At the same time, Rick was at home cooking dinner with their kids, Michael and Sarah. He felt blessed to have Cindy in his life. When she arrived, they had dinner together, and Sarah shared a story about playing with the neighbor's cat. After the kids were in bed, Cindy made love to Rick, perhaps to reassure herself. Over the next 6 months, Cindy organized 4 weddings at Winfield Scott. Bennett's subtle touches and frequent visits made an impact on her. Rick only accompanied her once, early on when Bennett was away. One night, after a successful wedding, Cindy and Lori shared a leftover glass of Dom Perignon on the patio. Lori, taking off her shoes, said, "Can we talk?" Cindy agreed. Lori expressed concern for Cindy, noting that Bennett was attracted to her and might pursue her if given the chance. She warned Cindy that getting involved with Bennett could ruin her marriage and that Bennett wouldn't settle down with her. Cindy, moved to tears, admitted her confusion. She loved Rick deeply and couldn't imagine hurting him, but Bennett's allure was hard to resist. Lori's gaze was firm but caring as she advised Cindy to consider her family's well-being over her attraction to Bennett. Cindy was left grappling with her feelings, knowing the potential consequences. Cindy took a few sips of champagne, pausing to gather her thoughts. Lori let her take her time, knowing Cindy needed to process everything on her own. "I've never felt restricted in my life. I fell for Rick quickly but always felt in control. With Bennett, I feel out of control. If the moment came, I think I'd give in," Cindy admitted. 6 months ago, I would have been offended at the idea of being unfaithful, but now I'm struggling. Marriage is a commitment both ways, and I can't imagine Rick with someone else. Why am I even considering this? "What will you do?" Lori asked gently. 80% of me wants to stay true to Rick and the kids. This is a great business deal, and I want to maintain professionalism. But 20% of me thinks I can have a fling, get it out of my system, and move on, Cindy confessed, tears in her eyes. Lori hugged her and offered support. The next day, Lori confronted Bennett. "If you pursue Cindy, I'll quit. I've worked with you for 7 years, and I'll know," she warned, leaving his office without waiting for a response. 3 weeks later, a sudden rainstorm disrupted an outdoor wedding. Cindy and Lori worked tirelessly to salvage the event. Late at night, Cindy and Bennett found themselves alone. Bennett comforted Cindy, telling her she had done her best despite the weather. Cindy, feeling vulnerable, leaned into him. They kissed, and Bennett made it clear he wouldn't push her into anything. Cindy, however, gave in to her desires. They spent the night together, discussing how to keep their affair secret. Cindy assured Bennett she could handle it without arousing suspicion. She left early in the morning, wanting to rest before returning to her family. Bennett cleaned up and went to sleep. When Cindy arrived home Sunday afternoon, her children, Sarah and Michael, ran to greet her with hugs and stories about their weekend. She hadn't been home since Friday lunch, but was welcomed with joy. "Daddy took us to the big kiddie park yesterday, and we went down the giant slide. Ralph is back, and Mrs. Bowling brought us cookies. Daddy made Mickey Mouse pancakes for breakfast and said we might go to Disneyland next week. Mommy, did Daddy ever take you on rides?" Cindy winced at the mention of Daddy and rides, recalling her recent affair. She mentally shook off the guilt as she saw Rick, looking fit in his shorts and t-shirt. Hugging him, she said, "Hi, baby. It was a rough wedding. I'm glad to be home. How are the twins?" "We missed you, Cinderella, but I love weekends with the kids. I'm glad your business is thriving. I saw the storm on the news and knew you'd be busy. Let me get you a glass of wine and rub your feet." Son of a cow, she thought. Loving kids, supporting me. I can't lose him. Later, they moved to the hot tub with wine, but Rick, exhausted, asked to skip it. Cindy agreed, hiding her relief. On Monday, Rick suggested a date night for Tuesday, and she eagerly agreed. Early Tuesday, Rick packed for both of them and left a note. Dress for your Cinderella date and be ready by 4 p.m. At 4 o'clock, they left the kids with Kelly and drove to the Ritz-Carlton at Dana Point. Cindy was stunned. Is Kelly staying the night? Yes. I didn't bring clothes. You have a bag in the trunk. Kelly checked it while you bathed the kids. You let her in my underwear drawer? Yes, she found something and said not to worry. She'll take you lingerie shopping. Idiot. They walked on the beach, had a great dinner, and talked on the balcony at midnight. Rick shared he was up for a partnership, meaning more money and less travel. He even mentioned joining her on some wedding weekends. In the dark, Cindy's troubled face went unnoticed. She quickly recovered, praising him. At breakfast in bed, they continued. Cindy reassured Rick she wouldn't quit her business, and he supported her fully. You're amazing at what you do, he said. How did I find such an amazing guy, she thought. I can't screw this up. She resolved to keep her affair with Bennett discreet. Despite her lack of guilt, she couldn't foresee the impending tragedy. Cindy believed she could juggle everything without hurting anyone, convinced that Bennett would eventually move on, and she would remain with her family. She never imagined how wrong she could be. The next month, Rick was promoted to partner. Cindy had a wedding at a San Diego hotel and discussed securing their affair with Bennett. She had been on birth control since starting her business because she and Rick agreed 2 kids were enough. In late June, things began to unravel. Cindy and Bennett were in his office discussing new business terms when Lori entered. I need to talk to you both, Lori said, seating herself. Bennett, remember our conversation 4 months ago? I said if you two were dating, I'd leave. Cindy was shocked. Bennett stayed calm. I saw you two kiss and go to bed the night of the storm. It was heartbreaking. You're acting selfishly, ignoring the consequences. I started job hunting the next Monday and will move to Austin in August to work for an event management company. Turning to Cindy, Lori said, I warned you. This will hurt your family. Rick doesn't deserve this. I won't let this affect our professional relationship, but only talk to me about work from now on. She left the room, and Cindy and Bennett sat in silence. Cindy eventually said, Bennett, I'm going home. I'm sorry for all of this. I'll call you in a few days. She drove to Orange County, checked into a Marriott, and cried herself to sleep after buying a bottle of Maker's Mark. Lori kept her promise and moved to Austin after working her last 2 weeks. Bennett didn't try to stop her. Cindy wanted to call Lori but settled for a text. I'm sorry my actions hurt you. You warned me, but I can't let it go unaddressed. By early September, Cindy and Bennett's relationship was strained by guilt, but their attraction remained. By October, they resumed their affair. One Saturday night, after a late wedding, they took Bennett's BMW to a secluded chalet on the Pacific coast. Oh my God, this is gorgeous, Cindy murmured, cuddling Bennett. Cindy had told Rick she was scouting Monterey and wouldn't be back until late Sunday. She just didn't mention she'd be with her lover. After checking out at 2 p.m., Cindy and Bennett walked on the beach and had lunch. They stopped in Big Sur for wine on their drive south. Cindy felt content, believing her business was thriving, her children were happy, and her affair was under control. In early December, Cindy coordinated a wedding at Bennett's Monterey Hotel. Rick, planning to surprise Cindy, booked a room under his name. He prepared flowers, her favorite wine, and bath oils, hoping to rekindle their connection. Unbeknownst to Cindy, Rick was already there. Rick waited until after the rehearsal dinner to surprise Cindy. He had spotted Bennett earlier, but stayed hidden. As he searched for Cindy, he heard her voice. Moments later, he overheard her say, Not here. Please wait until we get back to your room. Turning the corner, Rick saw Cindy and Bennett together. Cindy, seeing Rick, screamed, Rick, what? Bennett stepped back in shock. Rick, heartbroken, fell to his knees. Cindy, realizing the gravity of her actions, sobbed and tried to console him. Rick, consumed by pain and anger, demanded, Why? As Cindy tried to explain, Rick stood up, anger building. No, Cindy, don't talk to me. Take her to your room, Bennett. She's all yours. He turned to leave, rejecting Cindy's attempts to reach out. Don't touch me, Rick shouted. You were everything to me, and now you've ruined us. Just go away with your stud and leave me alone. Cindy couldn't fight the only common sense she'd shown in a year. She let Rick go, knowing this wasn't the time to try to explain or comfort him. She had broken his heart and needed to leave him alone. Shocked herself, she asked Bennett to leave her alone, then returned to her room. Lying on her bed, she tried to calm her racing heart, horrified by the mess she had created. Rick, meanwhile, sat at his desk for an hour, struggling to think. Realizing he couldn't stay there any longer, he decided to go home, arriving early Sunday morning. He planned to shower and change at his office before facing Mrs. Bowling and the kids. Before leaving, he wrote Cindy a note and left it on the table. Cindy, I'm going home to the kids. You broke my heart and soul. I need time to think. When you get home, email me first. I'll leave before you arrive. Don't contact me otherwise. I can't trust you anymore. I loved you with all my heart, and now I hate you for what you've done. Bennett found Rick gone and the note on the table. He cursed himself for not being more cautious and felt powerless to help Cindy. He placed the note on her bedside table and stood guard outside her room. Cindy woke at 6, exhausted from emotional turmoil. She washed her face, cried, and then saw the note. She read it and collapsed, sobbing. Bennett came in, knelt beside her, and held her. Though tempted to blame Bennett, she knew their affair was a mutual choice. She remembered Laurie's warnings and knew she wasn't a sufferer. Cindy had made her choices and now had to live with the consequences. I'll go home as soon as I can pull myself together, Bennett. I have to face this, Cindy said. I know, Cindy. I wish things were different. You're an amazing woman and friend. If I could fix this, I would. Just know I'm always here for you, Bennett replied. Thank you, Bennett. I hope this doesn't hurt you, but we may never speak again. He hugged her tightly, like a friend, then left, telling the staff to bring her car around, but to leave her alone. The staff, knowing the situation, went about their business. When Cindy was 15 minutes from home, she texted Rick, Can we talk when the kids are asleep? It's all my fault, but I hope we can find a way out. Rick replied, Cinderella, I've already fed the kids. This is our last contact until I reach out to you. Please honor my request. She wept, realizing the name Cinderella might never be used by him again. She was no longer his loving wife, but someone who had deeply betrayed him. At the end of the longest week of her life, Rick called. She answered immediately, hopeful. Hi, Rick. I'm glad you called. Rick, steady but emotional, said, I'll be home around 5 tonight. I'll try to act normal around the kids for a few hours, then sleep in the spare room. We won't talk until tomorrow morning. Is that okay? Yes, Rick, Cindy said quietly. When can we talk? We'll have Mrs. Bowling babysit Sunday afternoon. We'll find a secluded spot in the park to talk. We should spend Saturday with the kids, as we might not have many more days together. His words, if at all, hit her like a punch. She agreed, saying only, Okay, honey. Rick replied, Please don't call me with affectionate names again. We are adults in a nightmare. Don't claim love or affection for me again. He hung up, leaving Cindy in tears. They managed through Friday's pizza and movie night, even laughing a little. Saturday was similar, with efforts to appear normal. The hardest moment was a group hug on the beach, where Cindy saw the dead look in Rick's eyes. Sunday morning was spent in pajamas over pancakes. Rick told the kids that Mom and Dad were going out, and Mrs. Bowling would watch them. The kids were disappointed but accepted it. At the park, they found a quiet spot to talk. Rick sat across from Cindy, facing the park, always wanting to see if trouble was coming. I'd like you to speak first, if you don't mind, Rick began. If I speak first, I might not control my words. I promise I won't interrupt you. Take as much time as you need. Please start whenever you're ready. Cindy felt this was like a negotiation, but since it was her fault, she let Rick lead. Of course, she replied. I don't know where to start, Rick. I've thought about this since last Friday, she began, omitting the painful details. You deserve the truth. I've been in a physical relationship with Bennett for almost 8 months. Rick lowered his head, but gestured for her to continue. Before meeting him, I'd never been attracted to anyone else. I didn't seek him out because of anything lacking in our relationship. While I didn't pursue him, I didn't resist his friendship and flirting. I realized early on that I was attracted to him. The first time we were together, he made sure I wanted it as much as he did. No one forced me. I'm not a sufferer. Everything that happened was my choice. She paused, then added, I love you, Rick, but I hid part of my heart from you for months. You may not have noticed, but a part of me was with Bennett. I lied to you and myself, thinking everything would be okay. Deception starts with yourself. I betrayed you and everything I care about. I don't know how this will end, but I know it will hurt our children too. I am deeply ashamed of what I did. Rick bowed his head and cried, overwhelmed with despair and grief. Cindy watched him, realizing the enormity of what she had taken from him. After 10 minutes, he finally spoke, his voice confident but barely above a whisper. Cindy, I don't know if this is our last conversation as husband and wife. I appreciate that you didn't disrespect me by saying it was just a mistake. I thank you for being honest. But I guess I'll never really know. Cindy lowered her head in despair, knowing his words were true and feeling the deep pain of her actions. She resisted the urge to look at him as he continued. You've been seeing Bennett behind my back for 8 months. I trusted you completely, but now I can't anymore. Cinderella is dead, and there's no Prince Charming to save us. I've never felt hopeless before, and I hate it. I'm not divorcing you now or anytime soon because of our children. Divorce is worse for them than loss. But I can't pretend we're the same for the next 11 years until they graduate. I can't look at you or act like we're okay. I feel stuck and hopeless. I'm seeing a psychologist this week to find a way to cope. Cindy looked hopeful, but Rick quickly added, I'm not doing this for you or our marriage. It's for my sanity and to keep loving our children. Cindy asked, Where should we stay? A hotel or an apartment? Rick replied, We'll stay in the house for now. I'll take an overnight business trip weekly, and you can continue your work weekends. What you do then is your choice. I'm not taking care of you now. If you prefer Bennett, go ahead. Rick, I'm not going to, Cindy protested. Rick raised his hand to stop her. Please, stop. You're acting like I care about what you do. I need to not care about you, just as you've not cared about me for the past 8 months. Maybe a psychologist can help me protect myself better. Until then, you're on your own. They sat for half an hour, crying without touching or comforting each other. Lori's warning had come true. The consequences were unbearable for Cindy, and it was only the beginning. For the next month, they pretended everything was normal for the kids. They attended Sarah's soccer games and Michael's karate lessons convincingly. Even Miss Snyder at the parent-teacher conferences noticed nothing wrong. But behind closed doors, it was different. Cindy wanted to talk, and Rick struggled to keep from falling apart. Cindy took responsibility for her actions, but it didn't lessen Rick's betrayal and humiliation. He told the kids he had overnight business trips, using that time to think and plan. He realized he would need long-term psychological help if this continued. Rick, a new partner at his firm, excelled in analytics, evaluating investment risks and opportunities. He now applied that thinking to his personal life, weighing the pros and cons of staying with Cindy. He considered the children's well-being, the firm's view of his family commitment, and financial implications of either staying or divorcing. He also pondered Cindy's feelings and her business. He realized there was a third radical option that might be best for everyone. It would be difficult to implement, but could work. On the third night of his business trip, Rick sat on the Marriott courtyard patio, considering all angles of his plan. After 2 weeks with the plan taking shape, Rick decided to have a serious talk with Cindy. He asked Mrs. Bowling to babysit and drove Cindy to the park where they first discussed her affair. At the same picnic table, they continued their conversation. Rick began, Cindy, these past few weeks have been horrible for us both. Thank you for giving me time to think. I want to share some thoughts and then hear your response. Cindy nodded, and Rick continued. I don't want to rehash everything, especially the night I saw you with Bennett. I've told you how crushed I am. I'm not perfect, but I've always been 100% committed to us and our kids. I've never cheated, even when I flirted. I can't imagine replacing you in my heart. I thought we would grow old together. I was wrong about your commitment to us. Cindy, with longing in her eyes, pleaded, Rick, I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I want to work hard to resolve the betrayal and stay together. Rick looked away before answering. I know you mean it, Cindy, and I've considered it. On one hand, we might have enough acceptance and forgiveness to stay together. Cindy felt a glimmer of hope, but Rick continued. But it's not right for me for 2 reasons. First, I can't regain your trust. I would always suspect you're meeting someone else. Second, I can't touch you as a husband without seeing the face of the man you chose over me. You wanted him, not me, and there's no way I can look at you without seeing Bennett's reflection. Cindy's shoulders slumped. She knew Rick was right and wanted to promise she'd be faithful, but she couldn't demand his trust. I want to fight for us, Rick. Aren't we worth fighting for? She asked. For the first time, she saw rage in his eyes, and she recoiled. Fight for us? What do you think I did every day? Working hard, moving up the career ladder, spending time with our kids, remembering what you love, that was all fighting for us? How have you fought for us, Cindy? By being with Bennett Davis? You stopped fighting 8 months ago, and now you want me to accept it and move on? Rick took a deep breath, tears in both their eyes. I want to ask you so many questions, Cindy, but how can I trust you? Maybe you're just sorry because you got caught. I want to go back to sharing our hearts, but that couple no longer exists. You eliminated us with your cheating and lies. We can only move forward with the best solution for everyone. I realized our night at the Ritz was after you were with Bennett. You partied with him, then came home and let me wine and dine you, thinking you were my faithful wife. I must have seemed like such a fool to you, happy to hear how proud you were of me. But no more. Cindy couldn't argue against anything, only feeling deep regret for the pain she had caused the man she had claimed to love with all her heart. He was right. He had fought for their relationship every day. She was the one who had betrayed his love. Her infidelity had been heartless to the husband she adored just a year earlier. Her infatuation, lust, and selfishness had pushed all of that aside. "Are you going to divorce me, Rick?" she finally asked when she could find the words. "No, Cindy, I'm not going to divorce you, and I'm not going to stay married to you. I'm creating a solution that I think will work for everyone. It won't be without pain and loss, but I believe it's the only acceptable solution. I promise I'll explain everything to you in a few weeks. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Cindy, but I'll explain my steps, my path, in detail. I'm not asking for your opinion on my choices because, quite frankly, I don't trust you to have my best interests or our children's best interests at heart. Once you understand my decisions, you can make your own. I won't try to control you." "But how will I know if you don't share that with me now?" Cindy asked, genuinely confused by the direction of the conversation. She wanted so badly to reach out and hold him, but it seemed like that would never happen again. Rick looked her straight in the eye with a calm, almost painful acceptance of fate, and replied, "You'll find out." They talked for a few more minutes, Cindy gently probing for vague explanations, but he didn't budge. He was sure she would understand when the time came. "A few months ago, my friend and coworker Lori warned me that if we danced to his tune, the piper would eventually show up and demand payment. I guess she was right." Rick was surprised to hear that Lori knew what was going on and had tried to warn Cindy and Bennett. It only hurt him more. "So before you were having fun with Bennett, you were warned, and you didn't stop. You didn't come to me to tell me about your struggle. You just carried on." Tears were already flowing freely from his eyes. Her husband was sobbing. Cindy burst into tears again and dropped her head in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Rick stirred, and she thought that maybe he would come to hold her. "Please, God, let him come and hold me," she begged in her heart. Instead, he stood up and moved toward her, folding his arms across his chest. When she raised her head, he said, "The trumpeter has come and is demanding at least partial payment. Maybe someday it will be time for full payment." 2 weeks and 4 days later, Rick left for his weekly business trip where he had time alone to sort himself out and work through his pain. He hugged and kissed his children goodbye, and it seemed to Cindy that he was a little sadder than he had been the last few days. It must be hard for him to say goodbye even for 24 hours, she thought. Cindy was sleeping better at night because she was taking melatonin, which helped her fight sleep at night. Rick suggested that she leave the children overnight with Mrs. Bowling and her cat, who had become almost an aunt to the children. Rick suggested that she could get a good night's sleep after a couple of glasses of wine. Cindy agreed, and Mrs. Bowling happily welcomed her young friends. At 5:30 a.m., her cell phone had been ringing nonstop for 3 minutes before she heard it, flipped it open, and picked it up. The screen flashed with the word emergency. "Hello?" Cindy said, trying to force herself to wake up. "Is this Cindy Thomas? Richard Thomas's wife?" said a professional voice on the other end of the line. Cindy sat up sharply in bed. No one called him Richard. "Yes, that's her. Is everything all right?" "Excuse me, Mrs. Thomas, but let me clarify that you live at 918 South El Camino Court. Is that correct?" "Yes," she almost shouted into the receiver. "And can you tell me what kind of car your husband drives?" "A dark gray 2019 Lexus ES. Why? Is something wrong?" "Mrs. Thomas, I regret to inform you that your husband was involved in an accident on California Highway 79, west of the Pacific Crest Trailhead near Warner Springs." "Oh no, my goodness," Cindy exclaimed. "Is he all right? Is he in the hospital or in an ambulance?" "I'm very sorry to inform you, Mrs. Thomas, but the accident turned out to be fatal. I don't know any other details, but his body is being transported to the University of California Medical Center in San Diego and should arrive there within the hour. I'm sorry for your loss." Cindy was stunned and couldn't move or even comprehend what she had just heard. Then the news hit her, and her screams would have woken anyone nearby. She cried and screamed into her pillow for almost an hour before exhaustion set in. She began to regain her senses, realizing she had to tell the kids. But how and when? She needed to call her mom and Rick's parents in Denver. She craved a friend's support, but didn't know where to turn. She needed to get to UCSD-MC immediately, but doubted if she could drive. Kelly was in Europe on business, so she couldn't help for a few days. Cindy splashed water on her face, dressed quickly, tied her hair into a ponytail, and headed for the door just as the doorbell rang. How strange, she thought. So early. It was Brad Stanton, the family lawyer and one of Rick's best friends. He looked devastated. Cindy, I heard about the accident on the morning news. I'm so sorry. With those words, she collapsed in his arms, sobbing and shaking violently. Brad held her in the doorway for a moment. Just then, Mrs. Bowling came out of her house in her bathrobe, running across the lawn with a concerned look. Cindy was too upset to speak, so Brad filled the void. Mrs. Bowling cried, but immediately embraced Cindy, offering comfort. After a few minutes, Cindy insisted on going to the hospital in San Diego. I have to see him. I have to see my Rick. Brad and Mrs. Bowling agreed that she would watch the kids, briefly tell them where Mom was, and take them to school. They would find out soon enough, but not now. Brad insisted on driving Cindy, and within 5 minutes they were on the road. Cindy's phone started ringing and buzzing with calls and messages from friends. She called her mom, who promised to be on the first flight out. Cindy then broke the news to Rick's parents, Connor and Lily Thomas. They were devastated, but also promised to get the earliest flight. They expected to arrive by the time the kids returned from school. Cindy turned off her phone, looked out at the Pacific Ocean, and started crying again. The next 5 days were a nightmare, explaining to the kids, thanking Grandpa, Grandma, and Mrs. Bowling for their help, talking to authorities and insurance companies. Cindy had 3 separate life insurance policies, arranging the funeral and managing clients who had booked weddings or family gatherings. The tasks seemed endless. Cindy was also troubled by questions. What was Rick doing an hour out of town on a deserted road so early? While no one called it reckless, he was speeding. The toxicology report showed Rick had only blood in his system, no booze, pills, or any substances that could impair his driving. The contents of his stomach showed he had eaten steak, salad, and potatoes the night before, drinking only water. Cindy was stunned. Bennett picked up his phone several times to text Cindy, but decided against it. He knew she was suffering immensely and realized his message would only make things worse. Lori was in a meeting with a new client when she got the news. Her assistant, Stacy, noticed her pained expression but found it odd that she didn't seem completely shaken. Lori did not attend the funeral. The funeral was held Friday morning and everyone who knew Rick attended. Cindy was shocked by what people said about him. She knew he was amazing, but hearing story after story, she realized just how loyal, caring, generous, and respectful he was. This made her feel even more desperate, thinking that if she had been more engaged with Rick, her affair with Bennett wouldn't have happened and Rick would still be alive. She needed to find out just how right she was. Late Sunday afternoon, Brad showed up at the house. He briefly spoke with Cindy's mom and mother-in-law, who immediately took the kids and left. When Cindy came downstairs, she saw Brad at the kitchen table with a peculiar expression. She offered him a drink, which he declined. Inviting her to sit, he began. Cindy, before I convey what I've been instructed to, I have 2 things to tell you. I'm your friend, but today I'm here as a representative of a client. That client is Rick. Cindy covered her mouth with her hand and gasped. I say my client is Rick because even though he is dead, I still act as his attorney and handle his legal and financial affairs. The second thing you should know for sure is that I had no idea what was going to happen to Rick. Cindy thought this was strange. How could anyone know what would happen as a result of an accident, or even that an accident would happen? Brad understood her confusion. Rick told me verbally and in writing that if anything happened to him, I was to honor his wishes. He paid me in full for the work, even though I offered to do it as a friend. He insisted that everything be done legally and properly. I don't know the contents of this note, but I know it is a letter from Rick to you. I have been instructed to deliver it to you and leave immediately before you open and read it. Cindy took the letter from Brad, her hands shaking violently. What else did he instruct you to do? She asked. Brad looked a little embarrassed but replied, I'm sorry, Cindy, but this is confidential information between me and my client. Rick strictly forbade me from giving you any details about our conversations, my duties, and his wishes. Again, I apologize. With those words, Brad got up and left without waiting for Cindy's response. Cindy opened the letter, and Piper reappeared to collect some of his debt. "Cindy, you already know I'm dead and the funeral is over. Brad handed you this note and left. The kids are with my parents and your mom. They know not to come home for a few hours as you will have a hard time processing this. This is the third option, Cindy. It's the best way I could find. I loved you with all my heart, and now that's gone. You've taken it away. I think it's the best thing I can do. One, you will know that 2 weeks ago I bought 3 acres of land by the lake at Eagle's Nest. It was for this reason that I was driving on Highway 79 where the accident occurred. The thing is, I bought the property because I had been promoted and we were both making good money. It was supposed to be a surprise for you and the kids. A place where we could build and grow during the summer and long weekends. First, of course, it's a scam. Buying real estate is a cover. But whatever you do, you have to stick to it. Insurance companies won't pay a claim if they find anything suspicious about my end of life. I visited the new cottage to do some errands and decided to get up early and go home. I was in a hurry because I had a meeting with a client at 9:30, so I was driving fast and lost control of the car. The insurance companies might do a little digging, but they won't find anything. Brad will take care of it if you stick to the story. 3, as far as insurance goes, I changed my will. In the last few weeks, 90% of my money, about $3 billion, will go into a trust fund for the kids. They will be able to get whatever they need to pay for college and grad school if they want. The rest will go to them when they reach age 30 and will be split equally. Brad will take care of those details when the time comes. I'm leaving you 10%, or about $300,000, to hold you over until you start working again in a month or so. I wouldn't leave you anything if my conscience allowed it. But I realize you have to take care of the kids while you pretend to grieve for me. So there's enough for that. First, as for our beautiful children, a while back I told you about a psychologist's advice that end of life is easier on children than divorce. I did some deep research and found several studies that indicate that this is true. That's why I couldn't divorce you, Cindy. I couldn't do that to my children. I think someday they will find out the truth about everything. And then they might hate me. I hope they don't. And if they do, I hope they have someone to explain to them how unfair life can be sometimes. I'm grateful that now and for the foreseeable future, they can grieve their loss and not have to bear the burden of rejection that comes with divorce. Second, I can't tell you what else to do with your life. I suppose you can go back to Bennett. But there may be someone else you are interested in. Whatever you do, please think of the children first and do what is best for them. They will be leaving home in 9 or 10 years. So maybe you can keep your lovers away until then. Third, finally, I have one small request. When you are done with this note, burn it until there are no ashes left. If the insurance companies find it, it will ruin our children's financial future. Reread it a couple more times. But please, if I mean anything to you, burn this note. Don't worry, maybe you'll hear from me again someday. Rick. Cindy cried harder than she ever had before. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing and wailing, calling out Rick's name. Overcome by the weight of her affair's aftermath, she feared it was more than she could handle. After about an hour, she finally gathered enough strength to sit up and reread the note 2 more times. Then she walked over to the fireplace and burned it until only a small pile of ashes was left. Piper had indeed come on a call, or so she thought. It's been 12 years since Rick Thomas died on California Highway 79. In reality, he died the moment he saw his wife with another man who betrayed him, their children, and their future. The rest was just details of how and when it happened. Cindy never remarried and kept Rick's end of life a secret. She followed his wishes and used the $300,000 to support the family as they grieved. It took her over a year to go back to work. She tried to adopt a professional persona, but her business focused mainly on weddings and family events, which she found challenging. She worked for an event planning company and made significant career progress in building relationships. She dated occasionally, but never found anyone like Rick. She also saw herself as damaged goods, though counseling helped her cope. She wondered if she met someone new and married again, would she end up cheating? Michael and Sarah urged her to date and find happiness. Dad would want you to be happy, they said. Yes, he always wanted me to be happy, she thought, and I used that to justify destroying him. The pain began to resurface. As for Bennett, about 4 months after Rick's end of life, he felt enough time had passed to send Cindy a note. Lori had observed that they were no longer lovers, but Bennett remained a faithful friend. One morning he decided to send her a message, It read, "I'm so sorry, B." A moment later, Cindy replied, "Me too. Goodbye." They never spoke again. Michael and Sarah had graduated from high school, were now in their early 20s and attending college. Michael, like his mother, enjoyed the energy of people coming together. He went to the University of Southern California to study hospitality and marketing. Sarah, like her father, was drawn to analytics. She found fulfillment in problem solving and went to Stanford to study economics. Although they were only 8 when their father died, both were deeply affected by his loss. The thought of their father never coming home was a constant presence, but their mom and grandparents worked hard to help them heal and start enjoying life again. Each of them, in their own way, used their father's memory as motivation for their lives. On a warm spring morning, Cindy sat at her desk in her apartment. She was sipping a cup of hot black coffee while reviewing a new contract for an executive retreat when the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she was greeted by Brad Stanton. "Brad, it's been months," Cindy said with a smile as she reached out for a hug. "I'm so happy to see you." Brad returned the hug but seemed a bit stiff. "Thank you, Cindy. May I come in and talk with you?" Cindy noticed that there was something formal about his tone. This wasn't just a casual visit from a friend. "Sure, Brad. Can I get you a cup of coffee?" "No thanks, I can only stay for a few minutes." They sat down at the kitchen table and Brad began. "Cindy, as you know, today would have been Rick's 45th birthday." Cindy flinched. She had completely forgotten that today was April 7th, Rick's birthday. She made a mental note to call the kids as soon as Brad left. "As you know, before Rick died, he changed his will and left instructions for what should happen in the event of his end of life." "Cindy, I'll be honest. I knew something was wrong. He wasn't himself, but he didn't want to tell me what was going on. As his friend, I pushed him, but as his lawyer, I had to follow his wishes. He never allowed me to understand what was happening until now." Cindy's eyes widened with surprise and confusion. "What do you mean, Brad?" "Before Rick died, he wrote me a long note that he never gave back to me. This morning, at exactly 6 o'clock, there was a loud knock on my door. When I answered it, a courier handed me an envelope from a P.O. box in Austin, Texas. I was a bit annoyed at being woken up so early, but curiosity got the better of me. I went back to my office and opened it. Inside was a 12-page letter from Rick and a short handwritten note from someone named Lori. Cindy began to tremble with a mix of resentment, pain, and memories. Brad continued. The note simply said, "Please read carefully and follow the instructions." I started reading Rick's note. The first line was so typical of Rick. "Hey buddy, get your back out of bed. I need you to help me finish some unfinished business." Yes, I know at 6 a.m. I told them it was exactly 6 and paid a little extra to make sure they were reliable. I won't detail the rest of the notes, Cindy, but I will say that Rick told me everything, the whole 9 yards in detail. He paused briefly to let her absorb what he'd said and saw tears begin to form in her eyes. "I can't imagine how you could do that to a great guy like Rick. A guy who gave you all his love and devotion. A guy who eventually gave you his life." Brad stood up and finished his business. Handing Cindy a white envelope with her name on it, he said, "Cindy, I never want to talk to you again. I will keep in touch with Michael and Sarah because they are my best friends. If I see you at a social function, I'll be polite for their sake, not yours. But don't ever try to contact me. Do you understand?" Cindy could barely get a word out, but looked at Brad and replied, "Yes, I understand." With those words, he turned and walked away. But as he left, she heard him mutter, "Selfish goddamn strumpet." The envelope lay on the table, daring her to open it. She recognized the handwriting. It was Rick's. It took a few minutes before she worked up the courage to open it, but she finally did. "Cindy, it's been 12 years since the events that brought us to this morning. In my last letter to you, I mentioned that maybe someday you would hear from me again. Maybe someday the children will know what happened to us and to them. Well, today that day has come. First, when I found out that Lori tried to talk you out of having fun with Bennett and you ignored her advice, I decided to turn to her for help. She's the only person on the planet who knew of my intentions. She begged and pleaded with me not to do it. She even said that I could take the kids and come to Austin to visit her. Imagine that. A woman of real character. I wish I had met her before I laid eyes on you. Anyway, when I declined to, she agreed to go along with my wishes. Second, my first request was that she keep this note until today, my 45th birthday. On that day, she was to give Brad this note along with a note for him promptly at 6 a.m. The note was to have Brad read my letter and then give it to you. I had a backup plan to get this note to you no matter what, but I hope Brad and Lori are in good health and were able to help me finish the job. Third, this morning, both Michael and Sarah will receive a similar note from me outlining everything that happened 12 years ago. I haven't left anything out. They are adults. I believe they have the right to know the truth, the whole truth. The statute of limitations on insurance fraud in California is 4 years, so their inheritance is safe. As I mentioned in my previous letter, they may hate me for this, but I'm sure Brad and Lori will help them make sense of what happened. Good luck trying to get rid of the lies you have told your children over the past 12 years. I'm sure if they want to talk to you, they will have more than a few questions. Fourth, if your mom and my parents are still alive, they will receive a similar note as partners in my firm. Fifth, as for Bennett, today's Santa Barbara News Press will publish a full-page memo about his machinations with you. It details how the two of you planned and created amazing wedding events while you cheated on me and he entertained a married woman. The article ends by urging people to seek help elsewhere. I may not be able to destroy him, but I hope it will make his life miserable for a while. Maybe you two can get together if you haven't already and have some good fun to ease the pain. By the way, you are named specifically in the article, so some friends and coworkers may have questions for you as well. Sixth, Cindy, almost 13 years ago, I thought we were as happy and content with each other as any couple could be. It all turned out to be a lie, a tragic lie. So, Cindy, you've picked the tune, you've enjoyed the dance, and now it's time to pay the bill in full. Rick. Moments after Cindy read Rick's note, her phone began to ring off the hook. 6 months later, all 3 BD properties were sold at a big loss to the owner, an Austin-based investment group, the Templeton Group. Davis Bennett, at age 53, was financially ruined.